The story already began in a strange way. Out of nowhere, a girl appeared, calling the protagonist, Inori, by name in a sweet tone. However, without any warning, she stabbed a sword into his chest and, oddly enough, began to cry. She seemed like one of those crazy people who stab someone and then ask for forgiveness. The weirdest part was that Inori didn't even know who she was. When he came to, he was back in his classroom. Maybe it had all just been a dream, since everything around him looked just like always, with the same old routine happening like any other day. But things didn't stay normal for long. A magic circle appeared across the entire room, and suddenly everyone was transported to a completely unknown place. In this new location, a woman surrounded by a radiant light appeared, introducing herself as a kind of goddess. She explained directly that everyone there would be sent to another world. That world was called Hygen, and their destiny was to serve the empire of the same name as heroes tasked with defeating the Demon King. It was the classic speech any fan of otherworldly stories would recognize. Before being sent, each of them would receive a special gift to help them on their mission. Soon after, they reappeared in a huge palace, where many people welcomed them with joy. To everyone's surprise, even the king showed up to thank the heroes personally and, along with everyone present, knelt before them and asked that they defeat the Demon King. Up to that point, everything was following the traditional pattern of these kinds of stories. As always, there was that one background character who asked if there was any way to return home. And surprisingly, there was. They could return exactly 1 month later, on the next full moon. So anyone who wanted to quit the adventure could choose to go back to their original world. Also, time would not pass in their world while they were in Hygen, making the journey feel like a kind of Isekai tourism for those who didn't really want to take risks. Even so, Inori started to grow suspicious of all that kindness. The blessing seemed too good to be true, and he felt like there was some hidden trick behind it all. Meanwhile, no one else said a word. One of the students, the background guy with glasses, asked for time to think. He wondered if they could stay there during that month before deciding, and the king agreed, as he couldn't do much about it. Either way, since the heroes were already there, they decided to celebrate with a banquet. The hall was filled with all kinds of dishes and ingredients. But while Inori was looking at the food, a new magic circle appeared beneath him. In his head, he thought it might be some kind of advanced technology, but in reality, the circle was active only under him. Just like that, Inori vanished, transported to a strange place that somehow felt familiar. As soon as he arrived, the same goddess appeared and made the exact same declaration as before. But when she saw him, she was surprised and asked why he was back again. Inori said he didn't know for sure either, but considering how things looked similar, he figured he was being summoned once more. The goddess admitted that she also didn't understand why it was happening, but according to the rules, she would have to give him another gift. And so, he was summoned again, only this time, the magic circle was yellow, different from the previous purple one. That meant he was being sent to a completely different place, and the situation now was far darker. Instead of being received with honors by a king, he found himself tied to a containment chair. In front of him, two people stared at him and referred to him as Test Subject Number 12. Just by the way they spoke and dressed, Inori immediately realized he was facing two mad scientists. One of them began explaining that they were going to conduct experiments on Inori's magic eye. According to them, every human summoned from another world received this so-called magic eye upon arriving. To prove it, the scientists were already preparing for a forced procedure, which suggested the experiment would be far from pleasant. To make sure Inori wouldn't cause problems or lose control, the scientists decided to use hypnosis on him. However, the procedure failed, which surprised one of the scientists and even caught Inori off guard. The other scientists said there was a reason for that. Inori had two magic eyes. One was the magic eye of time, and the other was the magic eye of truth. That made test subject number 12 extremely rare, something unusual even among summoned humans. Since hypnosis wouldn't work, the scientists decided to proceed with the experiment while he was awake, making it clear that this wouldn't just be a test, but rather true torture. Desperate, Inori saw another magic circle appear, this time green. He was once again transported and once again came face to face with the same goddess, who greeted him with a sarcastic smile as everything repeated itself. She even joked, asking if he was starting to like her. But Inori, trying to stay calm, simply asked if she finally knew what was going on. The goddess replied that she still was not sure, and their conversation continued almost casually despite all the chaos around them. In the new place he was summoned to, Inori appeared before a noble girl accompanied by an elf. From the conversation between the two, it became clear that in that world, humans were considered monsters and destined to become slaves. However, before anything could happen, Inori was summoned again. Taking advantage of the fact that he had once more encountered the goddess, he asked if she now knew the truth. The goddess then revealed that she was beginning beginning to understand the situation more clearly. She explained that summoning targets were usually people with very strong souls, since they needed to endure the transfer between worlds. However, Inori's case was even rarer because his soul was incredibly strong and unique. This surprised him, as he did not consider himself particularly good at anything. But the goddess clarified that it had nothing to do with goodness. Because of that rare soul, he kept being dragged to different worlds. The only way to stop the cycle was to form a hero contract, which would bind his soul permanently to a single world. In the next summoning, Inori was finally recognized as a hero once again, and the power he received that time was the ability to steal the abilities of others. However, before he could complete the hero contract, he was summoned yet again. This time he encountered a woman using dark magic, but he did not even have time to speak to her before being pulled away to another place. In the sixth summoning, everything changed completely, because he ended up becoming the Demon King instead of a hero. After that, during the seventh time, when he was already recognized as the Demon King, the goddess commented that Inori's abilities were truly impressive, but then she warned that the next summoning would be the last. Somehow, she had managed to interrupt the soul transfer process, bringing an end to that chaos. She also explained that she would gather all the abilities Inori had obtained so far, and that he would, from that point on, be able to view his own status using the Eye of Truth. Thus, he was summoned once more, now officially as a hero. This time, it seemed he was on the right side, or at least that was what he hoped. Along with him, 3 other students were summoned, Ryuto, Tamaki, and Aoi. As usual, they were received by a king. But according to legends and to the king himself, there were supposed to be only 3 heroes, which made it clear that Inori's presence was a mistake. His final summoning had been entirely random. Faced with this situation, the king stated that Inori had been caught by accident, something unprecedented until then. During the conversation, a princess appeared claiming that she was the one who had performed the summoning and that everyone should be grateful because of that. After her arrival, she began explaining the situation so everyone could understand what was happening in that world. The place they were in was known as the Kingdom of the Rising Sun, a world where not only humans existed, but also other races, all of which had previously been ruled by the Demon King. He was invading nations, exterminating humans, and spreading chaos. To try to stop this invasion, all countries had come up with a joint plan. The idea was simple. Each nation would summon its own heroes, train them, and launch them against the Demon King. In short, it was not just that group of 4 heroes. They planned to assemble a true army of heroes and attack from every direction, hoping that something would eventually work. It was a strategy of brute force and persistence, where the hero who proved strongest in the end would stand out. As always, in every summoning to another world, the inevitable question appeared. This time it was Ryuto who asked if there was a way to return to their original world. The princess, with a hint of disdain, questioned why he would even ask, since according to her, they were now heroes of the Kingdom of the Sun, and no longer needed to worry about their previous world. Even so, the answer was direct. There was no way to return. With that resolved, the king asked each of them to place their hand on a magic stone to reveal the blessing they had received. Ryuto was granted the blessing of Limit Break, Aoi received a magical barrier ability, Tamaki was blessed with magical affinity, and Inori, in turn, received the detection ability. Basically, he was like a human radar. Next, they went through physical and magical ability tests. It became clear that Ryuto was incredibly strong physically, practically superhuman. Aoi and Tamaki, on the other hand, stood out significantly in magical skills. Inori, however, failed to demonstrate anything special. To make matters worse, he was physically weaker than the girls. When night fell, the 4 of them gathered in Ryuto's room to discuss their future. However, Inori was not exactly welcome in the conversation, since the others felt he had not contributed anything during the tests. Even so, he realized their comments came more from concern than contempt. They were trying to keep Inori from being sent to war, since he clearly was not ready for it. Despite that, Ryuto acknowledged the value of Inori's ability, saying it was essential. He then asked Aoi to use her magical barrier to protect him during missions. She accepted the request without hesitation, making it clear that Ryuto had already taken the lead of their group. The harmony between the 3 was so obvious that it was easy to tell they had probably lived comfortable and popular lives in their previous world. Tamaki, changing the subject, asked if they should really stay in that country. Seizing the moment, Inori joined the conversation and commented that the world did seem nice, but in truth, he was holding a piece of paper with information that revealed they were being watched. This meant that Inori's detection ability was not as useless as it seemed. In practice, his power functioned like a radar capable of scanning the surroundings, seeing through walls, and detecting hidden people. At that moment, he had noticed that one of the servants was still eavesdropping on their conversation, even after they had ordered everyone to leave the room. Faced with that, Inori asked Aoi to raise a soundproof barrier so they could talk more privately. She managed to cast the barrier, but warned that it would not last long. Tamaki quickly asked why they would be spying on their conversation in the first place. Ryuto replied that it was obvious. The powers the heroes had received were too dangerous, and the kingdom wanted to know exactly what they were planning. Inori agreed, and added that the kingdom of the sun was probably desperate. Even without knowing much about that world, he could already tell something was off. Everything around them seemed a bit neglected, as if the kingdom was going through financial troubles. He observed that the king had few guards, and that even the food, though Tamaki had found it tasty, left Inori with a strange feeling. On top of that, the room they had been given, which was supposed to be worthy of heroes, was way too simple, almost poor. Inori knew the difference since the first time he had been summoned, the kingdom that welcomed him overflowed with wealth and luxury. Setting that comparison aside, Inori suggested that the group should find a way to escape that country. With his detection ability, it would be much easier to avoid surveillance. It was clear that the three of them were the kingdom's only hope, and for that reason, they would never be allowed to leave. Inori also suspected that the story about them not being able to return to their original world might be a lie. As he spoke, Tamaki noticed that Inori's eye was glowing yellow, which made him quickly cover it, having completely forgotten about that detail. With the combination of a glowing eye and strange behavior, Ryuto commented that maybe they should just leave Inori alone. Everyone was starting to think he suffered from what they called 8th grade syndrome, also known as Protagonist syndrome, that type of person who believes they are special and always talks about secret powers and mysterious destinies. Back in his room, Inori decided to check his stats. There were a lot of numbers, but he had no idea whether they were good or bad since he had no frame of reference. While reviewing his abilities, he discovered several he did not even remember obtaining. Among them was detection, and also a monster-related ability that he had acquired when he was summoned to that world where humans were seen as monstrous creatures. In truth, he was a vampire in that world, and along with his vampiric ability came a debuff called Hatred of the Sun God. This meant that as long as he was under sunlight, Inori could only use 10% of his total strength, with most of his abilities completely sealed. That might have been the reason he disliked the local food, which was full of garlic. It also explains something else. At one strange moment, he felt an uncontrollable urge to bite the girls' necks and suck their blood. With all these revelations, Inori realized that instead of using his detection ability to scan the surroundings, he should have analyzed himself from the very beginning. He was being summoned from one world to another, accumulating powers and abilities, yet he had no real idea how to use them properly. In practice, he only knew how to use two: detection, and another one that allowed him to create weapons by consuming the magical energy of certain materials, which was already quite powerful. But among all of them, what stood out the most were his eyes. His left eye, in particular, was called the Magic Eye of the Poet, a name that had probably changed at some point, but it hid one of the most overpowered abilities possible. With that eye, Inori could literally see everything if he wanted to. Now that he possessed the true Mystic Eye, Inori could instantly record any magic circle to cast spells. In short, he could practically do anything he wished. He had other abilities as well, but the one that drew his attention the most was vampirism. Depending on how much blood he consumed, he could turn a person into a ghoul, or even make them his subordinate. If he offered his blood to a monster or used it during summoning, he could also turn those creatures into servants. However, if he drained all the blood from someone, Inori would not only absorb the victim's ability, but also gain access to their memories. The only problem was that all of this power only worked at night. And speaking of night, as soon as it ended, the next day they began martial arts training under Diana Ishida, none other than the kingdom's knight commander. From what Inori could tell, she was absurdly strong enough that they probably didn't even need that many heroes. Diana explained that even if Tamaki wasn't physically specialized, she still needed to learn the basics. Normally this would require intense strength training, but it would not be necessary for her. Inori agreed since the three of them had already surpassed human limits. However, his training would be very different. He needed to develop his strength until it at least reached the level of an ordinary soldier. That was a huge problem, since he became extremely weak during the day. While he was thinking about that, two girls appeared, escorted by several guards. The first was the older princess, and since the second was also surrounded by guards, it was clear she was a princess too. To Inori's eyes, the second princess was extremely beautiful, but she had a stiff posture, almost like a doll. Before he could think more, the first princess began to speak, saying everyone should feel grateful, because the princesses princesses were there to visit and train them. Inori immediately disliked her, finding her arrogant and irritating. Meanwhile, the second princess approached Inori and informed him that she would like to speak with him later that afternoon. Later, in the royal chamber of the Kingdom of the Rising Sun, the second princess announced that he would have classes with her every afternoon. The reason was that the others were taking lessons with the first princess, and since she refused to train someone who wasn't even considered a hero, Inori was separated. Faced with this situation, Inori swore that one day he would get his revenge, and this time it actually made sense to agree with him. During the first lesson, Inori immediately started asking questions, beginning with whether the second princess was younger than the first. She replied that she was not, but that it was due to complicated circumstances since the first princess was the heir to the throne. With that alone, Inori realized it was better not to dig deeper into the topic. Continuing the lesson, the second princess explained that the kingdom had been founded by a heroine, a witch who helped defeat the previous demon king. For that reason, the country's culture was deeply tied to the tradition of witches, known as spellmaids. As a consequence of that, the throne of that kingdom was passed down through female heirs. The king would marry someone from the royal family and serve only as a regent, but when the queen divorced him, he would automatically cease to be king. After those explanations, there was a class about magic, but no one understood what was said because the blockhead Inori fell asleep in the middle of the lecture. Later, already in his room, Inori was reading a book he had borrowed from the second princess. That alone was already a bit rude, since he not only borrowed the book, but also slept during her class. One would expect the princess to be mad, but she just smiled subtly. Ignoring that part, while examining the contents of the magic book, Inori tried to use his Eye of Truth to activate a spell. However, despite the effort, nothing happened. That's when he remembered the other eye, the one with the photographic memory ability. Inori decided to try activating a specific magic circle, one he hadn't tested yet. It was the hypnosis circle, the same one that crazy scientist had tried to use against him. Using the right eye with photographic memory, he recorded all the details of the circle, while the left eye scanned and attempted to activate the magic. To confirm if it had worked, he called a maid and tested the hypnosis on her, which apparently succeeded. The first question he asked was extremely stupid. He wanted to know what color underwear the girl was wearing. She answered that it was black, and using his right eye, Inori visually confirmed it was true. Setting that pervy part aside, he noticed something interesting. His left eye could only activate magic and circles that belonged to the same world that the eye had been summoned from. In other words, the scientifically insane world. That's why the hypnosis worked. That detail left him a bit disappointed, as it meant he could only use specific types of magic. Even so, by recalling all the magic circles he had seen so far, including those used in his summoning process, Inori used the other eye and managed to activate a teleportation spell. But it wasn't exactly common teleportation. It was as if he was summoning himself to another location. By using the eye that could see far distances, he would summon a magic circle at a distant point and then be teleported to that place. It was hard to explain, but it worked like a self-summon from afar. Taking advantage of being outside the castle and that it was night, Inori began testing other abilities. He activated a dark control magic that allowed him to manipulate inanimate objects and store them inside his own shadow. The limitation was that he could only control inanimate objects. He couldn't affect living beings, but once the magic was deactivated, everything returned to normal. Along with that, he used an ability called Shadow Steps, which allowed him to walk through shadows and move freely anywhere, which was extremely convenient. Using his weapon creation ability, he transformed a stone into a sword. That moment, he remembered that during training, he had used his right eye to memorize all the movements of Commander Diana Ichida. By copying every technique she demonstrated, he tried training on his own. Even though he was exhausted, he reached Sword Mastery Level 1. Since he had already trained quite a bit with swords, he figured it was time to level up by fighting a monster. Looking around, he ended up finding a ridiculously strong and very ugly creature. Despite that, he recognized the monster as the source of the meat they usually ate at the castle. Even the mattresses they used seemed to be made from that creature's skin. He wondered how people managed to hunt such a powerful beast. Faced with that, Inori decided to search for a weaker monster to fight first. And so, while walking through the forest, Inori ended up encountering several monsters. Some were weaker, but most were much stronger than him. The truth was that he didn't even know for sure whether the monsters were truly strong or if he was just ridiculously weak. In practice, he could fight some of them in direct combat, but he knew he stood no chance if any of them called for reinforcements. So, he decided it was best to retreat and head back home. Meanwhile, in the palace, Diana found none other than the second princess, who was wandering through the halls looking for her. In fact, she had gone after the commander because she had been informed that the heroes were not using the so-called sacred artifact, especially the hero Inori. Diana then explained that she was first preparing a solid foundation for them. The artifact did indeed greatly increase a person's power, but she didn't want the heroes to become dependent on external power from the start. After hearing that, the second princess remained silent for a few seconds, and then agreed. She admitted she had been hasty in questioning the methods of someone considered the most powerful woman in humanity. As expected, Diana truly was strong. Observing the subtle smile of the second princess, Diana commented that her glow seemed to have returned. She took the opportunity to ask for her opinion on the crown princess. The second princess began praising her sister in various ways, speaking well of her posture, virtues, and strength. However, Diana wanted to know if she truly believed all that. The answer came coldly. The second princess said the commander should be careful with her words, because even though she was the most powerful and capable of defending herself, the castle was full of eyes and ears. Speaking ill of the crown princess in that place was not safe at all. After that, the second princess simply walked away, leaving Diana with a sad and disappointed expression. 2 weeks passed. Ryuto became stronger with the sword. Tamaki began using her magic in a different way, striking enemies with her staff instead of just casting spells from a distance. Meanwhile, Aoi decided to focus on the bow, which made sense since it was the best choice for her. Normally, bow users are vulnerable when enemies get close, but Aoi could create barriers around herself, eliminating that weakness. In short, Ryuto was the close-range fighter, Tamaki acted as a support unit from mid to long range, and Aoi was the long-range archer who could still protect her allies. Inori, on the other hand, had only begun his combat training 3 days earlier, since he didn't even have enough strength at the start. Now he was training in weapon throwing, trap detection, and stealth. It was clear they were trying to turn him into a scout, which made a lot of sense, given his detection abilities. These were his daytime activities. At night, he continued training his dark magic. The problem was that training time was very limited. Since he could only use his powers at night, he began wondering if there was a way to break the curse placed on him by the sun god. But thinking about it wouldn't solve anything for now. So the best thing he could do was focus on improving his skills. And that, of course, included hunting more and more monsters. Using his Shadow Step ability, Inori managed to deal with a strange creature that looked like a giant forest chicken. Actually, he didn't kill it right away. He used his shadow mana combined with his weapon creation skill to form special energy threads, with which he completely restrained the monster. Then, using his hypnosis eye, he eliminated it calmly and silently. He did this to prevent the creature from screaming and attracting others, which could be dangerous. With the monster already dead, Inori was able to use his dark magic on the body, which was now considered an inanimate object. In addition to controlling the corpse, he also managed to send it to the world of shadows, where the monster would be devoured slowly without drawing the attention of other creatures. This method helped Inori evolve quickly, because by draining the blood of his victims and acting like a true vampire, he could greatly accelerate his growth in power. That basically became his routine: hunt monsters at night, send their bodies to the shadow world, and absorb energy. Before dawn, he would return exhausted to his room, usually waking up the next day with Nala, the maid, calling him. During that time, Inori tried to avoid using hypnosis on Nala too much, though at first he had abused the ability to uncover some important information about the palace. That was how he discovered the story of the second princess, Alaya, and how she lost her position as heir, even though she was the eldest daughter. It all started because the queen took a long time to get pregnant. This was a serious issue since the royal bloodline suffered from a delicate condition. If the women aged too much before having children, they risked developing fatal diseases. To avoid a succession crisis if the queen were to die, the king was granted permission to take a concubine from the royal family and produce an heir with her. That was how Alaya was born. Her name meant successor to the crown. She grew up as a dedicated princess, adored by the people. But everything changed when, at 7 years old, the queen finally managed to have a daughter. Her name was Amanda, which meant the one who is loved. The queen's daughter inherited her mother's magical powers, and thus became the favorite. Alaya was pushed aside, removed from the line of succession. When Amanda turned 7, she was officially named Crown Princess, and Alaya's name, which once symbolized hope and succession, lost all meaning. In Inori's eyes, Alaya looked like a wax doll placed on a shelf, ignored and forgotten. After learning her entire story, he began to feel a certain empathy toward her, since he too was someone nobody believed in. Just like he was seen as useless, Alaya had also been cast aside by a system that valued only power and appearance. During one of their conversations, Alaya caught Inori's attention by saying that, even if she seemed a little strict, knowledge was an essential power for survival. She began explaining various things about magic, tactics, and how the kingdom worked, but Inori understood very little since she usually spoke when he was almost falling asleep. Still, she noted that he was learning stealth techniques well during physical combat training. She said that, although Inori had no talent at all for the magic of that specific world, he should still keep trying. It was a rare case, because not even the simplest spells that even Nala could use worked for him. While she was talking, Inori was just listening, until he commented that Commander Diana was probably just training him to use him as a pawn among the heroes. Upon hearing that, Alaya became upset, saying it wasn't like that at all. She genuinely believed in his potential to become stronger. All he needed was to truly commit to his own training. Taking advantage of that moment, Aliyah asked Inori to follow her. They descended several staircases until they reached a gigantic door, in a place that didn't feel pleasant at all. According to Alaya, their training would continue in that room. But before entering, she looked at him and asked if he didn't feel ashamed of being called a failed hero. Inori was completely confused. He had no idea why he was being taken there and didn't understand what was happening. The real reason was that Alaya had been hiding her emotions ever since that misfortune in her past. She disguised them so well that she earned the nickname of Doll Princess. But now, standing before him, she showed a completely different side. As soon as they entered the room, she was direct. She said that if Inori continued the way he was, he would be expelled from the castle. After all, no one there was obligated to support someone considered useless. Inori replied that although he was incompetent in several areas, his detection ability was extremely useful. Alaya agreed with that, but insisted that as a hero, he should give his all. From her perspective, it made sense. Every time she saw Inori, he seemed to be sleeping. But from his point of view, every night he went out to hunt monsters and improve his skills. He wasn't as strong as the other three, but he was still doing his best. After explaining this, he tried to leave the room, but he couldn't. Alaya revealed that there was a magic barrier that prevented both escape and sound from leaving the room. Right after explaining that, she kicked Inori. It was completely uncalled for, and he didn't understand why. Then she began scolding him, saying he had many advantages yet still refused to improve. And worse, if he were expelled from the castle, the creatures outside would kill him without hesitation. At that moment, Inori realized he was no longer looking at the doll princess. What he saw now was a tall, imposing, and determined woman. She was clearly demanding a different attitude from him, asking him to fight more for himself. And that's when Inori started to laugh. Acknowledging that Aliyah was an incredible woman, he apologized for judging her wrongly, as he never imagined she was that strong. He also told her not to worry, since out of all of them, he was probably the one who wanted most to protect himself. After that, it was Aliyah who apologized. In truth, she had also judged Inori wrongly. For some reason, she now realized he was much stronger than before. Inori thanked her for that, and after the incident, he started thinking about a plan. He didn't want to be expelled from the palace, since he still needed information. So the next day, he began doing his best to use his detection ability as effectively as possible. After all, the next phase of training would be inside a dungeon, and if things stayed the same, he would be kicked out before even setting foot in it. He went to talk to Diana, trying to see if she could do something for him. She replied that it wouldn't be difficult to solve. Inori tried to convince her, explaining that his ability was useful, and even though he wasn't on the same level as the others, he was trying his hardest. However, Diana said it wasn't about that. In fact, she wanted him to join the Order of Knights, because his detection ability was considered priceless. After all, if they could predict where monsters would appear in advance, the survival rate would increase dramatically. For that reason, Diana made it clear that Inori's ability could be extremely valuable for the good of the kingdom, even if not as a hero, but rather as a soldier. That way, he would at least have an important role, and wouldn't end up exiled as a useless hero. However, Inori knew that by accepting a place in the Order of Knights, he would be tying himself permanently to that country. Because of that, he chose not to accept the offer at that moment. Diana left the proposal open, as an alternative to consider in case he was really expelled from the group of heroes. A few days later, on the day of another class, news arrived that heroes from a neighboring country would be visiting the Kingdom of the Sun. Because of that, Alaya announced that there would be no classes in the following days. This caught Inori off guard. She also remarked that anyone who sleeps during lessons does not have the right to attend the official reception. It became clear to him that they were trying to leave him out on purpose. Sometime later, while the foreign heroes were arriving, Inori was sulking in his room, knowing he wouldn't be allowed to join the party. Deep down, he even understood why. If he participated, someone would have to explain how a boy was summoned by accident, which would cause unnecessary trouble for the kingdom. With nothing to do, Inori decided to use his right eye to see from a distance. He ended up spotting Alaya, who once again had that rigid and serene expression, like a doll. He also noticed there was a lot of food at the party, which immediately made his mouth water. According to what he learned from Nala, that reception was one of the reasons for the kingdom's economic crisis. Their finances were already in bad shape, but the queen remained obsessed with displaying power to neighboring nations. She spent everything she could, even ignoring the king's own advice. Putting that aside, Inori observed the two foreign heroes. There was a girl and a boy. Among them, what caught his attention was a blonde young man. It wasn't clear if he was Japanese, but thanks to the Golden Eyes analysis skill, Inori discovered that his name was Date Masayoshi. Using lip reading, he noticed that Date was basically challenging him to a fight. What was strange was this: how did he know that Inori was watching from afar? That was still a question without an answer. After the party, Inori was summoned again, and once more Date called him out for a duel. This surprised everyone present. Naturally confused, Inori asked why. Date answered that he wanted to prove to the goddess that Inori wasn't worthy, which left the protagonist even more stunned. What did the goddess have to do with anything? Apparently, the explanation was this: as soon as Date Masayoshi was summoned into that white space and met the goddess, he fell in love instantly and proposed to her. Not knowing how to deal with the situation, the goddess replied that she would only consider the proposal if he managed to defeat two other heroes, one of them being Inori. The goddess basically threw the problem onto someone else. While Inori was talking with her, none of the other heroes seemed to have visited that white space or met the goddess, suggesting they were probably summoned by a different method. Returning to the subject of the duel, Inori agreed to participate, but with a few conditions. After all, his blessing wasn't meant for combat, and he didn't even have the physical build for a proper fight. Besides, what kind of future hero would propose such an unfair duel just to crush the opponent? Date accepted any kind of contest, which showed how naive he was. Inori's condition was that the duel should be decided inside the dungeon their group was already scheduled to explore. The winner would be the one who defeated the first floor boss first. Date agreed without hesitation. Ryuto then asked Inori what he planned to do, considering he had no strength. Inori simply answered that he had a plan. After the duel, Inori went to meet the queen, and apparently he had lost. Date was absurdly strong and cleared out all the monsters on the way until he reached the boss, who was defeated with ease. Meanwhile, Inori was avoiding monsters, trying to reach the boss before it was too late. In the end, he didn't get the chance to fight it because Date had already won. The queen was furious with yet another display of incompetence. She couldn't understand why the commander of the knights insisted so much on keeping Inori in the kingdom, claiming he was valuable. That defeat was the last straw. As a consequence, the queen decided to exile him. But seeing the little smile on Inori's face made it clear that this had been part of his plan all along. After the announcement, Inori raised an objection. The queen had said he caused damage to the country, but he argued that it didn't make sense. He had lost the duel, yes, but what was at stake was merely a qualification to get the attention of a certain woman, nothing official. Besides, there was a rule that prohibited any information about the duel from being disclosed. That meant no one knew he was a hero and his existence had not been revealed to other countries, so there was no way he could tarnish the kingdom's image. Deep down, it had all been a farce. During the time he spent in the dungeon, it was as if he didn't even exist. And Inori hadn't just stood by watching Date eliminate monsters. In fact, he had prepared a gift, many gold coins. Knowing he stood no real chance in a direct fight with an offensive-type hero, he used his detection skill to find hidden treasure and brought it as a present for the queen. In short, he used the duel as an opportunity to prove his value and avoid exile, which he managed to do. That night, he went out hunting as usual. He was already tired of always eating the same meat, especially that strange giant chicken. While observing the forest around him, he noticed that something felt off. Even using his detection skill, he sensed that something was out of place. That was when he activated his right eye, an extremely powerful ability that ignored illusions. With that eye, he was able to see a strange barrier in the middle of the forest. Perhaps his eye worked there precisely because it was from another world, since normal perception couldn't detect that barrier. Since it was an illusion barrier, Inori quickly deduced that something important must be hidden inside. Driven by curiosity, he decided to enter. Apparently, the barrier was not the only thing protecting that place. Inori's curiosity was bound to kill him someday, and it was hard to understand why he simply didn't take advantage of the isolation and run away with the gold he had given to the queen. After all, that kingdom was already going downhill anyway, so it made little sense for him to stay. In any case, back to the story. As soon as he entered the barrier full of illusions, the first thing that happened was an attack attacked by gray wolves. However, they didn't last long because Inori used his skill called Black Death Web and killed them all with ease. Those wolves were clearly stronger than the strange giant chicken he used to hunt, and for that reason, if he kept hunting such creatures, he would level up much faster. After walking for a while inside the barrier, Inori reached its center, where there was a tree and a lake. It was obvious that this setting indicated the presence of a boss, and without even having time to react, Inori lost his arm after being attacked by a gigantic wolf and was thrown far away. Using his detection skill, he identified the creature as a phantom beast of the Fenrir type, known as the White Wolf. Being a phantom beast, it was clear that it was no ordinary monster. While Inori wondered whether he should escape through the shadows or just run away, the White Wolf attacked again but missed. That was because Inori had started flying, revealing his bat wings, since he was a vampire. Upon seeing this, the White Wolf began talking to him, revealing it was an intelligent monster, which made it even more dangerous. The White Wolf asked what he was doing there and what his goal was. Inori, with all his shamelessness, replied that he had gotten lost, but the White Wolf knew that was a lie, because no one reached that place without going through the illusion barrier. Under pressure, Inori admitted that he had entered because the existence of the barrier indicated that something valuable was hidden there, and judging by the Guardian's mood, it probably wasn't something bad. The White Wolf then said that since Inori would die soon, he might as well explain. That place was a land protected by a pact between him and a witch, and his mission was to guard the location by eliminating any dangerous and resilient creature, like Inori himself. During this conversation, Inori's arm began to regenerate, which even surprised him for a moment, until he remembered that his vampiric regeneration was absurdly powerful. The White Wolf immediately realized he wasn't a normal opponent and went on the attack. Even caught off guard, Inori managed to dodge thanks to his right eye, which had absurd perception. However, his body couldn't keep up with the movements his eye could see, so he knew he wouldn't last long in that battle. Trying to escape, Inori flew downward, but the plan failed. The White Wolf used its own fur like hundreds of arrows and struck Inori midair. He could barely react. But while flying injured, he found a waterfall and tried to escape the forest through it. The White Wolf was faster, pierced Inori's wing, and nearly killed him. In desperation, Inori summoned several giant stakes that shot up from the ground. It was not magic. He had hidden those stakes in the shadows and used them as a trap. Even so, the plan failed because the attack had no effect on the White Wolf. And for those who might think he should have simply used some kind of teleportation ability, well, it was not that simple. Inori's left eye had an important limitation. It could only store one spell at a time, and to swap the stored spell, he needed to look directly at the new spell. At the moment, the only spell engraved was Hypnosis, the same one he had used against the Grey Wolves. To escape the situation with the White Wolf, he needed an opening to visualize another spell and then perform the teleportation. However, the wolf did not give him a single moment of opportunity. With no options, the only thing Inori could do was cast his shadow webs, but they had no effect. Trying a different strategy, he used the trees as a base to trap the White Wolf, like he had done with the smaller wolves, but the trees could not withstand the creature's crushing strength. Faced with this, Inori decided to use a more dangerous method. He ran, climbed a tree, and jumped, remaining suspended in the air and purposely making himself an easy target. The moment the White Wolf leaped to attack him, Inori executed his plan. With his left eye, he aimed at the shadow threads he had left in the trees and copied the spell drawn there. It was a precisely constructed teleportation magic circle. By observing the design from above, he managed to imprint it into his left eye. Before disappearing, Inori pierced the White Wolf's eyes, causing the creature to go into a frenzy and attack wildly in all directions. Even blinded, the wolf could still track Inori by scent. Knowing the situation would only get worse, Inori teleported away. Back in his room, completely wrecked and bleeding, he vowed that next time he would kill the White Wolf. From that day on, he began to upgrade his equipment. He stole materials from the kingdom's 5th armory and obtained rare metals that might prove useful, since his regular weapons were ineffective against the Fenrir. During the previous battle, he had managed to pull out some of the White Wolf's fur. Using his appraisal skill, he discovered that the fur had magical properties and could be crystallized, hardened, and even miniaturized with the use of magic. That explained why his previous attacks had no effect. The fur reacted to magic, not to simple physical blows. Using his weapon and creation skill, he forged black threads from that fur and created Gleipnir, inspired by Norse mythology, in which that magical chain was used to bind the original Fenrir. He transformed Gleipnir into a special glove with crystallization properties. With this glove, he activated the ability that made the threads glow, allowing him to freely switch between different magic circles. Now he no longer needed to draw spells with threads every time he wanted to use magic. They were all stored and accessible directly from the glove. Since he was creating so many things, he also decided to make a new outfit. The result was an elegant black suit that made him look like a true demon king. Despite the new appearance, his goal remained the same: revenge. Without hesitation, he teleported back to the Fenrir's territory. As soon as he arrived, he taunted the creature, saying its eyes looked beautiful. He was literally laughing in the face of danger. The Fenrir wasted no time and began attacking him with fury. The blows kept coming, but just when it looked like Inori was cornered, he summoned black wolves. The attack caught Fenrir off guard, not because of their power, but because of the scent they carried. A familiar scent. Inori explained that during their previous battle, he realized the potential of those wolves and decided to turn them into his servants. Seeing this, the Fenrir became even more enraged and attacked with greater force. Inori took quite a beating, but just when a deadly strike was about to land, he teleported upward. That was when the Fenrir declared that this had been the worst possible choice he could have made. In fact, Inori had planned everything on purpose. Before the white wolf could notice anything, it was already trapped. The reason was simple. It had been captured by strange threads that could not be detected by smell alone. These threads had been made from Fenrir's own fur, and since the wolf relied entirely on its sense of smell, it failed to notice the trap. With the Gleipnir in hand, Inori tightened the magical rope even more, forcing Fenrir to the ground. The wolf tried to break free from the threads, but it was no use, since one of Gleipnir's properties was being unbreakable by Fenrir's own hands. After that, Inori approached the wolf and calmly explained how it had fallen into the trap so easily. But since there was no point in explaining something to someone who was already about to die, he simply finished Fenrir off right there, in front of its subordinates. Fenrir's final words indicated that the pact had come to an end. As soon as the blood was completely drained, Inori leveled up a few times and acquired new abilities. Among them, one stood out, a unique skill called King's Vessel. Because of it, Inori began to hear the thoughts of the other wolves and realized they were trying to communicate with him. In fact, they wanted to make a request to their new master, asking him to bring Fenrir back, this time as an ally, since he had fought to the end to protect that territory. Inori accepted the request. After all, he had nothing to lose. Later that same night, during dinner, Ryuto was trying to fix the relationship between the first and second princess, since the two seemed to be on bad terms. The second princess didn't think they were exactly fighting, but she did notice that the first princess kept giving her strange looks. Meanwhile, Inori was already tired, and to make things worse, he couldn't enjoy the food because it was full of garlic. In the middle of dinner, Ryuto decided to involve Inori in the conversation, explaining that they needed his help. Among everyone present, Inori was the closest to the second princess, so they wanted to know if he could try to fix the relationship between the two sisters. Inori was blunt and said that it was impossible, since the first princess deeply hated him. Even so, Ryuto said that wasn't a problem, as all Inori had to do was talk to her. According to Ryuto, the first princess was actually in love with Inori, which made him feel a bit full of himself and lose a few points with the other girls at the table. Still, getting back to the topic, Inori wasn't going to do it for free. Ryuto then offered a reward. If he managed to solve the situation, he would get 1 day off per week. That was more than enough for Inori to agree immediately. Sometime later, he ended up meeting the first princess, who kept her usual tsundere attitude. She said she didn't want to be there, but since Ryuto had asked, she would do a small favor for the commoner. Inori already felt a certain disdain for her and thought he shouldn't even be helping, but he went along with it. Upon entering the princess's room, he noticed several luxurious items scattered around. The princess started bragging right away, and Inori bluntly asked if she bought all those useless things herself. She replied that she didn't, since she was a noble and received everything from others. Realizing that the conversation was going nowhere, Inori got straight to the point and said he wanted to talk about the second princess. The first princess, named Amanda, said she didn't care, but her facial expression said otherwise. Just looking at that, Inori already felt exhausted. Still, he explained that they had asked him to help the two make peace. Amanda kept insisting that she didn't want to and that it was none of his business. Inori was already running out of patience. He then said that he would have no choice but to talk to Ryuto and tell him that Amanda wasn't even willing to consider speaking to her own sister. The moment Inori mentioned Ryuto's name, the first princess changed her mind instantly. So they sat down, and Amanda began to tell her story, the same way a random old man on the street starts talking after a simple hello. Basically, in the past, she and Alaya were very close. Since Alaya was very smart, she was always teasing Amanda, who admired her a lot. Everything was going well until suddenly, Alaya began to grow distant. At the time, Amanda had just turned 7. That was when she found out that Alaya was not her biological sister. From that moment on, their relationship fell apart. After that, Amanda was forced to go through several strict training sessions. Over time, she began to realize how much she missed having her sister around. In addition to teaching her many things, Alaya was also kind and made the days lighter. Amanda often thought about how much more fun life would have been if her sister had stayed by her side. However, the adults around them never allowed the two to reconnect, and that was what truly pushed them apart. After hearing all that, Inori understood the situation. Everything in that room, including Amanda's meaningless decoration, was the result of adult influence. The environment had no personality at all. Nothing in there expressed who Amanda truly was. Everything had been imposed on her. The only real trace of her identity was the proud and arrogant way she carried herself. That was the way she had found to affirm that she still had some control over her life. Following that reasoning, Inori said that the only thing she needed to do now was to declare that from that moment on, she would call Alaya her sister. Amanda thought the idea was a bit embarrassing because she imagined the maids would gossip and criticize. But Inori questioned what the problem was since she was the first princess. Or did the maids suddenly outrank her? Trying to dodge the idea, Amanda came up with other excuses, like saying that maybe Alaya wouldn't like the approach. But Inori argued that the second princess wasn't someone that weak. After thinking it over, Amanda said she would reflect on it and thanked Inori. Later, back in his room, Inori told everything to Nala, who was a kind of assistant connected to the second princess. She would be the one responsible for passing the information on to Alaya. The next day, as soon as Inori woke up, Nala arrived with a message. Alaya had sent word that there would be a special class that day, different from the usual ones, which made Inori already smell trouble in the air. Sometime later, he was already in the middle of the capital, right on the busiest street, which obviously didn't make any sense. After all, what kind of class would take place there? Alaya, a little embarrassed, explained that day, Inori would accompany her shopping like a noble because he needed to learn about economics and other social matters. When Inori asked what they were going to buy, she said maybe some accessories, something like that. Faced with that, Inori started reflecting on how different the two sisters were. While one said she never bought anything because everything was given to her, the other was right there, choosing things based on her own taste. Interrupting Inori's thoughts, Alaya asked which accessory he thought was the prettiest. He replied that anything she chose would look good on her. However, Alaya clarified that the gift wasn't for her. That was when Nala explained the situation. As soon as she passed along the conversation about Amanda to Alaya, the princess decided she would buy a birthday present for her sister as a way to reconnect. The doubt was why she needed Inori's opinion for that. After all, it had only been a day since he had talked to Amanda, and he barely knew her. Most likely, any gift he chose wouldn't make much difference. Since Amanda already received gifts all the time, it wouldn't have much impact. Hearing that, Alaya became visibly uneasy. If it was really true, then maybe it didn't make sense to give a gift at all. But Inori responded by saying that what truly mattered was who was giving the gift, not what the gift was. That made Nala reflect. In truth, Inori just wanted to finish everything quickly and leave, but his words ended up revealing a kind side he didn't even realize he had. While Alaya kept shopping for the gift, Nala commented that if it weren't for Inori, the princess would never have even considered giving her sister a present. Seeing how happy Alaya was in that moment, Nala silently thanked Inori for being the one who brought the princess's smile back. And so 5 days later, Inori was specially invited to the first princess's birthday party. Upon arriving at the ballroom, he noticed the place was filled with high-class guests. There were nobles from all over, and among them was Ryudo, who quickly began to compliment Amanda. She was visibly pleased with the praise, which showed that the mood between the two was very good. Looking toward another part of the party, Inori spotted Diana speaking with a man identified by his Eye of Truth as Chancellor Vitre, the one responsible for the kingdom's security. They seemed to be discussing something serious, probably related to strategic or military matters. Meanwhile, Alaya, the second princess, was hiding in a corner, dying of embarrassment at the idea of giving her sister the birthday present. To make things worse, Ryuto was standing right next to Amanda, which made it even harder for Alaya to approach. While Inori observed the situation and considered what he could do, Alaya approached him, asking what she should do in that situation. Inori, maintaining his direct manner, simply said that since he had already forgiven what she had done earlier, specifically when she kicked him, they were even now. And since it was not the right moment for a kick, he simply gave her a gentle push, making her stumble and get closer to Amanda, which immediately caught the attention of everyone at the party. As soon as Amanda saw her sister in front of her, she blushed. The atmosphere became tense for a few moments as people began to comment. But that was when Alaya gathered her courage and handed over the gift. Amanda was surprised, as she was not expecting it. Upon opening the gift and seeing that it was a hair accessory, she asked her sister to put it on for her. As soon as Alaya adjusted the accessory in her sister's hair, Amanda asked if it looked pretty, and Alaya said yes. That made Amanda very happy. The people around them also became excited, realizing that she genuinely liked the gift. However, Amanda wanted something more. She wished to hear Alaya call her big sister. Recalling the past, Alaya eventually agreed. The two then hugged, calling each other by name with affection. Even the king and queen could not hold back their tears in the face of such an unexpected scene. At the side, Ryudo Ryudo thanked Inori, acknowledging that in the end everything had worked out, but Inori quickly reminded him that he had not done it for free. The reward was still pending. Ryudo laughed and said he would take care of that. Turning his attention back to the two sisters, Inori felt satisfied for having brought them together again. But since the whole scene was getting too sentimental for his taste, he decided to step out for some fresh air. As he went to the balcony, he was followed by Alia, who said she wanted to talk. Inori, realizing that she wanted to say something important, checked if no one else was nearby and confirmed that they could talk in peace. He told her she no longer needed to keep hiding or act like a doll, as she always did. However, before any conversation could begin, a scream from inside the palace echoed throughout the hall. Startled, Alia tried to run inside, but Inori held her back, trying to protect her. What was happening was completely unexpected. Inside the hall, the bodies of the king and queen lay on the floor without their heads. The scene was horrifying. The one who had done it was none other than Chancellor Vitre himself, who stepped forward and declared before everyone that, due to the corruption and terrible administration of the kingdom, he was taking the throne for himself. He justified his actions by saying he had royal blood, and therefore proclaimed himself the new king. To complete the coup, he announced that the new queen of the realm would be Diana. As this absurd scene unfolded, Amanda, upon seeing her mother's head thrown on the floor before her, entered into absolute despair. In a fit of rage and pain, she summoned her magic and charged directly at the Chancellor, ready to fight with all she had. Luckily, she did not get the chance to get close because Diana acted first and cut off her arm without hesitation. This immediately alarmed Ryudo, but Diana warned him directly that if he interfered, he would be the next one to lose his head. Meanwhile, Chancellor Vitre continued his speech, saying they were the children of the witch, and that betraying her will, as well as summoning heroes, was a mortal sin that could only be paid with death. Right after this declaration, the next person to lose their head was none other than Amanda. Faced with that shocking scene, it was hard to imagine what was going through Alia's mind. She even tried to call her sister's name, but Inori quickly covered her mouth. He reflected that a betrayal right in the middle of a party like that was too flashy. However, it made sense, as the Chancellor's corrupt nobles were all present. For that reason, the Chancellor Vitre gave the order for all knights to eliminate those cursed nobles, which triggered a brutal massacre. Chancellor Vitre shouted that everyone there deserved to die. Meanwhile, Inori turned to Alia and gave her two options: die pointlessly or run away to survive. On the other side, Ryudo stood before Amanda's body, saying that even though the nobles were wicked, they should not have been killed like that. The Chancellor replied that Ryudo understood nothing about the country's situation and therefore had no right to judge. And since he did not want to kill the heroes directly, he ordered Diana to simply capture them. Even so, Ryuto did not stand still. He activated his limit break and used a skill called Sword of Light. He even tried to attack Diana, but the strike had no effect. He insisted with several blows, but all of them were easily blocked by her, who did not even seem to be trying. Meanwhile, Aoi and Tamaki were surrounded by soldiers and could barely react, as they were vastly outnumbered. Diana told Ryudo that if he stayed there, his companions would end up defeated. She added that he would never be able to beat her and was simply wasting time, as she needed to go after the second princess. At that moment, Inori once again pressured Alea, asking if she intended to stay there and die or escape. He even hinted whether she would give up again, just like she had done with her sister before. Remembering Mana, Alea stood up determined, saying she would survive for her sister, because no one else had the right to decide her fate. That decision caught Inori by surprise, and he then declared that he would help the second princess, or rather Alea, since from now on, he would no longer call her a doll princess. Back at the fight, Diana easily destroyed Ryudo's Sword of Light, delivered a powerful kick to his stomach, and left him unconscious. Almost at the same time, she struck Aoi's barrier just once, which was enough to defeat both Aoi and Tamaki. As a result, the three of them, Tamaki, Aoi, and Ryudo, were captured. Surveying the whole situation, Diana began to wonder if she had wasted too much time dealing with Rudder, since the second princess was no longer present. However, that did not worry her much, as the girl could not escape on her own. What she did not know was that the princess was not alone. With Inori's help, the two of them were managing to evade most of the soldiers. However, the moment was approaching when Alea would need to use magic. Alea was somewhat hesitant to use magic against the soldiers of her own kingdom, but even so, she launched an air bullet. To avoid killing anyone, she aimed directly at their heads, causing the soldiers to faint from lack of oxygen. Seeing this result, Inori praised her efficiency, since she had taken down three at once. However, Alea said it had only worked because she had prepared beforehand. She was also worried about how tired Inori seemed. Still, since they were still fleeing, there was nothing else to do except keep running. Dealing with regular soldiers was something they could manage, but the problem would be if they ran into Diana along the way. That was why they needed to escape as quickly as possible. Sometime later, they found a room where Inori suggested they rest and plan an escape route. It was one of the rooms designated for servants, but those who once lived there were no longer in this world. Among them was Nala. Even for someone used to difficult situations, Inori was touched by that moment. Alaya, crying a lot, still affirmed that she would move forward for all the people she loved, which surprised even him and anyone who might have witnessed the scene. Meanwhile, on the other side, Diana had sealed the three heroes inside a magical prison that worked as a special artifact. No matter how powerful they were, they could not escape, even by using magic. Tamaki asked why Diana did not just remove their shackles, hinting that there was no need if the artifact was already so strong. But Ryuto replied that it would not make a difference, as the mere act of summoning heroes to that kingdom was already considered a coup. The government's plan was to keep the heroes as hostages to buy time. Diana agreed, but also remarked that Ryuto seemed far too tense, as if he were consumed by bloodlust, without having the power to do anything. Even so, she understood very well how he felt, as she had faced a similar situation in the past. Before leaving, Diana advised Ryuto not to forget what he was feeling at that moment if he wanted to survive in that world. He needed to make rational decisions, but also learn to use his emotions as motivation. According to her, if he had been smarter, he could have provoked all the soldiers into fighting him, creating a distraction that would have allowed Tamaki and Aoi to escape. In the end, all he did was get in the way and act with total incompetence. Putting that matter aside, Diana ordered a search throughout the castle and the entire kingdom until the second princess was found, as she was essential to their plans. Meanwhile, on Alia and Inori's side, they continued working on the escape route. Looking over the map, Alaya managed to chart a path leading to a secret passage connected to the underground. Through that route, they would be able to exit the castle safely. No one would know about it, as only members of the royal family knew the way, which greatly reduced the chances of crossing paths with Diana. Even so, they decided to use the detection skill as a precaution. While planning their escape, Alia apologized to Nala, saying that in the end, she had failed to protect her or do more for her. As they ran through the hidden passage they had discovered, Inori realized that depending on how long they took, they could end up surrounded. For that reason, they needed to move faster. However, they did not have enough time. Inori warned that they were about to be ambushed, as more than 20 guards were ahead of them. Since they were already surrounded, it would be impossible to avoid direct confrontation. What was most concerning was that they were very close to the entrance of the secret passage. With such a massive number of soldiers there, it was clear that the royal family was not the only group who knew about that route. In short, the only way through would be to eliminate the soldiers, something Alaya did not want to do at all. But both the narrator and Inori made it clear to her that if she hesitated out of pity for her enemies, she would be the one to die instead. After thinking for a moment, Alaya declared that she truly had no intention of dying without fighting back. She was determined to give it her all. Seeing that her determination remained firm, Inori was pleased, as it meant she would be even more useful in the future. He then explained that, according to Alaya's own detection ability, an army was approaching their position. The problem was that he did not know whether this army had come to rescue the royal family or if it belonged to another country. To make matters worse, reinforcements would only arrive around sunset, which, according to Inori's calculations, meant they had about 15 minutes. In other words, they had to survive for 15 minutes and find a way to escape. With that in mind, the two of them kept running non-stop. Even when facing soldiers along the way, Alaya tried her best to fight while still protecting them. However, because of the overwhelming number of enemies, she could not block every attack, and little by little the two of them began to get cornered. Still, they kept moving forward, using magical barriers to block paths and prevent the soldiers from following. But it did not take long before they ended up in a corridor with no way out. The sun was almost setting, and faced with that situation, Alaya began to panic. Inori, on the other hand, stated that there was nothing else they could do. They were completely surrounded, and there was not even time to talk. Soon the soldiers arrived and began launching magic attacks one after another. Alaya tried to defend herself, but the sheer amount of magic was too much, and her barrier started to break. Wounded and drained of energy, she reached a point where she had no more mana to continue fighting. In despair, she asked Inori where the reinforcements he had promised were. However, he had disappeared. That sent her into a panic, as he had sworn they would escape together. Now, with him gone, it felt like everything had been a lie from the very beginning. But at that moment, just as the sun finally set, it was time for the real Inori to act. As soon as he appeared, everything around them was covered in intense darkness, catching all the soldiers by surprise. A giant wolf appeared beside him. It was Fenrir, summoned directly by Inori, who ordered the creature to kill all the enemies. Fenrir charged forward without mercy and utterly destroyed the soldiers. The last surviving soldier screamed for the vice commander, declaring that a monster had appeared. But Inori replied that he could scream all he wanted, because no one would come to save him. Then he turned to Fenrir and asked if it was finished, to which the creature replied that everyone there was too weak. The soldier, trembling at the sight, questioned what was happening and whether the man in front of him was really Inori. But the protagonist simply said that if they were killing people, the least they should expect was to die as well. As for the doubt about his identity, he said he would let death answer that question. And with that, Inori charged at the remaining soldiers, slaughtering all of them without hesitation. Meanwhile, Alaya was still holding on. She had stopped her own bleeding using the little magic she had left. However, even with all that effort, it was already too late for her. Inori approached and asked her not to look at him that way. He explained that his powers only worked after sunset, and that was why he had to lie about the reinforcements, to make sure she held on as long as possible. But when he looked into Alaya's eyes, he saw that she still had the same will to live. Because of that, he offered her a single option. He then asked if she was a virgin, because if she was, there was only one method for her to survive. However, it came at a cost. She would become his subordinate. Faced with the proposal, Alaya understood that she had two choices: die as a human or abandon her humanity to survive. While thinking about it, she remembered her sister in Nala, which strengthened her decision. She then declared that she would live, even if it meant selling her soul to a demon. Inori was quite pleased with her response. In fact, she was right. He no longer resembled a god, but rather a demon. With the choice made, Inori bit her neck, and Alaya felt as if she were being swallowed by a darkness filled with blood. Shortly after, Inori ordered his hounds to turn the dead soldiers into ghouls and protect Aliyah while she was unconscious. Meanwhile, he would go out to have some fun. On Chancellor Vitray's side, the soldiers arrived with the information that they had found the second princess, which to him meant the plan was nearing completion. He began to recall his youth when he watched people starve and felt powerless. He saw himself as a sinner for not being able to do anything at the time, but he didn't remain idle. He killed soldiers who stood against him, with the help of a companion who shared the same ideals. However, while immersed in those memories, the Chancellor was suddenly surprised and decapitated. At the same time, Diana felt a strange and unsettling premonition. Back with Inori, he noted that Chancellor Vitray didn't even have time to become king before losing his head, just like his predecessor. He then declared that their plan had failed and asked what they would do now. The answer came in the form of a scream for vengeance over the Chancellor's death, exactly what Inori had hoped for. It was the perfect excuse to slaughter that absurd number of soldiers without remorse. And so, another massacre began. During the bloodshed, a group of women approached the palace. Upon arrival, they found Inori surrounded by a pile of corpses. He immediately recognized who they were. They were the Sisters of Battle, Diana's most loyal subordinates and part of the elite force, including the vice commander of the Royal Knights. The vice commander asked if Inori was responsible for all that destruction. He responded by asking if, assuming he confirmed it, she would use her full strength against him. That bold provocation was enough for one of the Sisters of Battle to charge at him and stab him, or rather, he allowed himself to be stabbed, saying that if he had killed someone she loved, he apologized. But even so, she should be prepared to take a hit in return. And with that, he knocked the opponent out while his body regenerated, which surprised the vice commander, but did not stop her from launching her own attack. Before the confrontation, Inori carefully analyzed the weapons those women carried. He noticed they were magical artifacts, something peculiar and dangerous. Before he could react, he was frozen and struck by two simultaneous blows, proving that the Sisters of Battle had real power. Even so, Inori didn't panic. On the contrary, he seemed to be enjoying himself. He cut off his own leg, which had been sealed to the ground, and leapt into the attack. The vice commander was preparing to strike again as soon as he landed, but she didn't even have time. The other sisters had been sealed to the ground with Gleipnir, while Inori calmly walked toward the vice commander, asking her to fight with everything she had. To Inori, Maria was just a good warm-up before facing Commander Diana. Upon hearing that, Vice Commander Maria commented that it was suicide, as he was planning to fight the strongest woman in humanity. Even so, Inori completely ignored the warning, asking why she was still holding back. He pointed out that she could simply abandon her 3 wounded companions and fight with her full strength. But despite having the power, Maria remained concerned for the others. Provoked, Maria became furious. She said Inori knew nothing about her, and since no one there actually knew enough, a flashback showed Diana introducing Maria to the other Sisters of Battle. At first, it seemed like they didn't like her, but in fact, it was the opposite. They were all interested in getting to know her better, wanted to talk more, and grow closer. That bond was what made Maria so furious when Inori insulted her companions. As the rage grew in her heart, Inori only became more excited. Like a battle maniac, he was completely ecstatic with the tension of the fight. However, his excitement was soon interrupted. Instead of focusing on the fight, Maria chose to try to save her companions. To her, in the end, those women were the true Sisters of Battle. But the act of trying to save them was in vain. The 3 had already been turned into Inori's own subordinates, which left Maria even more shaken. Inori, on the other hand, was disappointed. To him, the warm-up had ended too early, and since Maria loved her friends so much, he asked why she didn't just die at their hands. Maybe that would make her happier, wouldn't it? Maria met a fate so brutal that it was better left undescribed. After that, Inori declared it was time to bring the entire situation to an end. Meanwhile, Diana was desperately trying to return to the palace. On the other side, Inori continued to massacre the soldiers and drink their blood. Deep down, Diana reflected that in moments like that, her instincts were usually far too accurate. And when she finally approached the palace, passing by the training grounds, she saw the decapitated head of none other than her beloved Lord Vitre lying on the ground. It was at that moment that Inori appeared and commented that the moonlight that night was beautiful. In truth, it was a Japanese joke used as a metaphor to say, "I love you." In other words, he was making a pun, as if he had just confessed his love to Diana by offering her that severed head as a gift. Whether he truly loved her or not, no one could say, but the provocation was clear. Continuing the conversation, Diana asked why Inori had demonic traits, something that only appeared in those who sold their soul to a demon. She wanted to know if he had done it just to survive. Inori replied that it didn't make sense, because all he had done was try to survive the only way he could. Even so, Diana began a lecture saying that living just to survive was a pathetic reason. She explained that she fought for her nation, for something greater, and that he needed a real reason to keep going in that world. So she apologized. She said maybe she hadn't taught him properly and regretted the decision he had made. Hearing this, Inori became furious. After all, he had caused all that destruction, and even then, she still treated him like a lost student. On top of that, her rebellion plan had failed. It was time for her to face that reality. To prove his point, Inori showed her the bodies of the soldiers and the Sisters of Battle, declaring that they were all dead. However, there was still one option. If Diana sacrificed herself, maybe the sisters could still be saved. Internally, Inori was already frustrated. He had been looking forward to fighting Diana, expecting a real battle, but she was still treating it like a lesson between master and apprentice. That deeply irritated him, as it was the last thing he wanted. So he began to declare that Diana's end would be just like Chancellor Vitre's. Still, if other soldiers appeared during the battle, he might spare them, depending on how satisfying her fight turned out to be. However, before he could finish his provocation, Diana slammed her sword to the ground with resolve. She declared that from that moment on, she was praying in memory of all her companions who had died unjustly. The sacrifice required for her prayer to reach the gods would be the life of none other than Inori Takafuji. Faced with that, Inori asked if she truly intended to abandon all her knights and kill them right there. To his surprise, Diana confirmed that she did, which left him confused. After all, if she won the battle, there would be no soldiers left for the kingdom she claimed she wanted to rebuild. But Diana responded firmly that even if the nobles were corrupt, the soldiers decimated, and the royal family extinguished, the people would remain. And to her, as long as the people endured, there would still be a kingdom worth fighting for. That was the true purpose of her life. Upon hearing that declaration, Inori began laughing like a true psychopath, revealing even more of his battle-obsessed side. He had underestimated Diana, but now he acknowledged his mistake. He apologized and promised to treat her with proper respect. Then he summoned all the soldiers he hadn't yet turned into vampires and sent them against her, as if offering them as a sacrifice to her purpose. At the moment Diana drew her sword, Inori felt a chill down his spine. She said that in the end, Inori had become her greatest enemy. With a single strike, she completely destroyed the army of ghouls he had sent. This was only possible because she was wielding an ancient and powerful artifact known as an ancestral weapon. Looking into Diana's eyes, Inori didn't feel fear, he felt excitement. Those were the eyes he had wanted to see from the beginning. Now that he was finally facing a worthy fight, and being recognized as her greatest opponent, he committed to fighting with everything he had. The first attempt was to use subordinates against her, but it did not work. Then he tried using the three Sisters of Battle, hoping Diana would hesitate for just a second. But she simply cut the three of them in half without a second thought. Not even surprise attacks from behind worked against her, making it clear that she was simply too powerful to be fought in any conventional way. Inori knew that if he got too close to his opponent, he would not survive, even with his advanced regeneration. He remembered that in a previous conversation, he had once asked why the commander was so powerful, and she had simply answered that Diana had always been strong. To make things worse, Diana had received a gift directly from the king, an ancestral artifact that increased the sword's cutting power as more mana was channeled into it. That sword could cut through anything, even daggers reinforced with dark magic, which made it clear that in her hands, the artifact could slice through any material she desired. As Inori tried to think of a way to attack her, Diana wasted no time and unleashed a powerful spell without any chant or incantation. The impact attack sent Inori flying from where he stood, as the commander declared that if he would not come down on his own, she would make sure he did. During the fall, Inori came up with a plan to turn the tables with a sudden move to try to catch Diana off guard. He actually succeeded in executing the move, but in the process lost an arm. The attack caught him completely by surprise, as if she had eyes everywhere. From Diana's perspective, Inori's acrobatic movements made him seem like a talented gymnast, something he immediately rejected in his mind. To make matters worse, Diana was now wielding two swords. The second was made of mithril and had the ability to cast any magic without the need for incantation, which explained the sudden strike she had performed earlier. Additionally, this weapon was especially effective against demons, like Inori himself. During the exchange of words and movements, Inori tried to attack her from behind, completely silently. Even so, Diana was able to defend herself as if she knew exactly what he was going to do. Surprised by this, Inori asked how she had reacted so quickly to an attack from a blind spot. He concluded that she must be surrounded by a thin layer of mana that acted like a radar, something the commander confirmed. However, that did not make much sense to him, since a detection ability should compromise the user's position. Diana then explained that to activate this detection-like ability, she needed to channel mana around herself, which indeed revealed her location. That made the technique useless for infiltration or stealth missions, but perfect for detecting attacks like the one Inori had tried using Gleipnir. Apparently, his plan had a chance of succeeding at the start, but because of her absurd sword, even Gleipnir had been cut with ease. Before she could get close again, she was caught off guard by a distant attack. Even though she managed to react, Diana realized this strike was different. Inori had used Fenrir, a skill designed to hit from afar, beyond the reach of her magical detection. It was a solid move, since she had fewer options for countering that type of attack. But even then, her reaction speed remained unreal. The fight continued with Fenrir, Inori, and other distance-based attacks, but the efforts seemed in vain. The strategy of prolonging the battle to drain Diana's mana would not work either, as she had yet to show any signs of exhaustion. Based on that, Inori began to form a new strategy, considering all the information he had gathered so far. The mana barrier she used, her insane reaction speed, and her overwhelming strength created a terrifying combination. He realized that keeping distance would not work, so he had to get close again. But Diana had already predicted that. As soon as he tried to close the gap, she launched another devastating strike, resulting in yet another loss for Inori. One of his hands was cut off again. Diana was already practically counting her victory when the unexpected happened. This was exactly the kind of moment Inori had been waiting for. The hand he had lost and that had gone flying became a crucial tool, as he used its shadow to strike Diana from behind. The shadow moved completely outside her detection range, catching the commander off guard and forcing her to make an immediate decision. She had to choose between attacking the shadow or attacking Inori. She chose to focus on him, since he was missing an arm. However, her choice was too slow, because Inori had already regenerated the lost limb. This made it clear that the only way to stop his regeneration would be with pure mithril. Even so, Inori did not fully touch the ground, as he used Gleipnir to interrupt his own fall midair. Taking advantage of Diana's moment of surprise, he activated a hypnosis spell, which almost worked. However, the commander simply sliced through the magic circle in the air, proving once again how absurdly powerful the ancestral sword she carried was. As she stepped back a few paces, she still had time to eliminate the shadow that was biting her heel. At that moment, Inori began to laugh, and this stirred Diana's curiosity, as she could not understand the reason for such an expression in the middle of such a fierce battle. He simply seemed to be enjoying himself, and that attitude made Diana realize that perhaps she was too. So the clash continued, filled with fast strikes, movement forward and back from both sides. At one point, Inori found an opening and switched the magic circle stored in his left eye, replacing the current spell with a teleportation circle. He appeared behind Diana, who still tried to slash the circle, but it was too late. He appeared just a few centimeters behind the commander, startling her and tried to bite her neck. In that split second, Diana had no way to escape, as her sword was in a bad position. Faced with an extreme situation, she took an equally extreme measure. She cast an offensive spell directly on her own arm, increasing the speed of her movement to a ridiculous degree in order to strike Inori before his bite could reach her. The strike was so fast that Inori could not even react. He lost his own neck in the impact, while Diana lost her sword and was also struck from behind by Fenrir. However, that did not help much, because she countered with a single blow and defeated the summon without effort. It finally looked like she had won the battle. The feeling was so intense that she even reflected on how long it had been since she last needed to fight with her full strength. But the moment she deactivated her detection, everything changed. Suddenly, she lost both arms at the same time. Inori, now behind her, calmly stated that his head was nothing more than a simple accessory. His body, still active even after being decapitated, had continued continued fighting on its own. He then kicked Diana away, placed his head back on his shoulders, and casually tested his movements, as if adjusting a loose piece, murmuring to himself while confirming that everything was working again. Seeing what had just happened, Diana began to wonder how Inori was still alive, even after being decapitated by a mithril sword. However, Inori had already noticed an important detail. Those mithril swords only work properly against demons native to that world. He became certain of this when Diana had cut off his arm earlier, and even then, his regeneration still worked. With that, he created an entire strategy based on the fact that her sword did not affect him as it should have. For those who did not understand, theoretically, mithril should prevent regeneration, but in that specific case, it did not. Realizing that his body kept healing even after being struck, Inori decided to use his own amputation as a trap to fool Diana. Besides that, there was another crucial point. Unlike humans, a vampire's vital spot was not the head, nor the torso, nor the limbs. The only truly vital point was the heart. In other words, he had only won that fight because he got lucky. He himself admitted that he lacked experience in hand-to-hand combat, something Diana agreed with, although she noted that he had truly given his best, which made her respect him more. That response, however, left Inori a bit frustrated, as he had given everything he had, and even then, she still pointed out technical flaws in his performance. Knowing those were Diana's final words, Inori declared that he would take all of her strength for himself. However, he made it clear that he did not intend to turn her into a servant or a ghoul, because he suspected that kind of transformation might not even work properly in her case. Sometime later, Inori calmly walked to the prison where the captured heroes were being held. He said that he had happened to find a lost artifact, and that this item would be capable of opening the cell where they were locked up. As he approached, both Tamaki and Aoi rushed to the bars, surprised and eager to know what was going on and how he had gotten there. But Inori simply ignored them both and activated his hypnosis ability. The effect caught them off guard, and they quickly fell under his control. On the other hand, Ryuto, who was also present, was not affected. The ability did not work on him, which revealed something important. Depending on the target's willpower, hypnosis could fail. Even so, Inori's goal with that hypnosis was not simply to subdue the two of them. There was something greater behind it, and he was about to reveal his true plan. Inori asked the two of them to let everyone know that, well, he had ended up dying. He also instructed them to take the scepter and burn down the entire castle, completely cleansing the place. However, Tamaki said she couldn't do that, as it seemed beyond her reach. But according to Inori, she was perfectly capable. The problem was that she was unconsciously holding herself back, and had not even realized the true power she possessed. To prevent the fire from reaching them, Aoi began raising a barrier around them. Little by little, Tamaki's power began to grow intensely. Realizing that things could get dangerous, Ryuto even tried to say something, but there was no time. Everything simply exploded. Even inside Aoi's barrier, the force of the explosion could be felt. Watching it all, Inori concluded that when Tamaki really wanted to do something, she became extremely dangerous. Returning to the main objective, Ryuto's mission from that point on would be to tell the truth to everyone. Meanwhile, outside the castle, many people witnessed the explosion. Among them was a black-haired girl. It was Alaya, who, at that moment, remembered her sister Nala and their parents. Even with all those memories, she knew that, after making that decision, the old Alaya no longer existed. Her thoughts were interrupted when Inori asked if she was satisfied. She replied that she was and asked if the cleansing was over. Somehow, Alaya knew exactly what Inori intended to do. Ever since his blood entered her body, it was as if they shared thoughts and knowledge. Because of that, she became a bit upset when she realized that her hair had changed color during the transformation, turning black. Also, although she was not completely sure, she felt that she was connected to Inori's words, actions, and thoughts. In practice, she could not disobey his orders or do anything that could harm him. To test this connection, Inori jokingly asked for her paw, and she gave it to him. The next moment, she slapped him, right in the face. Still, Inori tried to make her see the bright side, saying that the new hair color looked nice. Alaya looked at him and gave a small smile, acknowledging that he was right. She also acknowledged that she had gained other important things through all of this. She was grateful because she had returned to life, had a bit of freedom, and, above all, a new goal. From what she understood, if one day she became stronger than her master, she might be freed from the connection. That meant she would not stand still and would move forward until she reached her true freedom. Upon hearing that, Inori smiled and said that the game should begin. But before anything else, they needed to go to the base he had prepared. Alaya didn't quite understand what he meant by base. Sometime later, they arrived at a cabin, which was the same place where Fenrir had taken care of the field before. Inori simply took advantage of the magical barrier that existed there, making the place place the most protected in the city. Previously, there was no cabin there, only a completely destroyed little house. But Inori used his weapon creation ability to repair everything, turning the place into a kind of shelter. It was hard to tell whether it was a house or a weapon. As soon as they entered, Alaya commented that the space was quite small, to which Inori replied that it was obvious. Compared to a royal bedroom, that place was tiny, and she should start getting used to it, because their life from that point on would have no luxury at all. To start with, there was only one bed. That meant they would have to sleep together. Hearing that, Alaya felt a bit embarrassed, but said she didn't mind. After all, it was Inori who saved her life, and she felt deeply indebted to him. Seeing that attitude, Inori remarked that he didn't expect her to take the initiative before even receiving an order. As she showed such conviction, he took the opportunity to ask her to take off her clothes. Alaya obeyed, and then Inori used his magic eye of perception. Combining that with his weapon creation ability, he transformed the old rags she wore into a new outfit. In truth, Inori just wanted to see Alaya's body to craft the outfit properly. But thinking about it, that wasn't even necessary, since his magic eye had an X-ray function. In other words, he could see everything without needing to ask her to undress. This made it clear that he wasn't so innocent. Even so, he tried to explain that the one who had improper thoughts was Alaya, because when he said she should serve him, he wasn't referring to that kind of thing. Moreover, he could very well choose his own partners, so he suggested that maybe she was overestimating herself. Alaya, however, didn't understand anything. She became completely embarrassed, ran out of the cabin, and once outside, she felt sad for being rejected. She just wanted to prove her determination, but there were other ways to do that besides what she had tried. Deep down, she had survived alone and even abandoned her own country. Maybe, in the end, she was seeking some kind of punishment. Upon hearing that, Inori was furious. To him, being by his side was basically a punishment. Was that it? Alaya tried to explain that it wasn't what she meant, but she couldn't express herself well. Even so, she made it clear that she had given up her life as a human in order to survive, and it was a choice she did not regret. Seeing such determination, Inori said he wanted to run an experiment and needed her help. Alaya agreed without question. He explained that among the skills he had stolen in the palace, there was one called Sex Technique. Despite the suspicious name, he said he only wanted to increase the level of that skill and thought that maybe just touching her would be enough. However, Alaya refused the idea. Still, Inori insisted, saying it would be gentle just to level up the skill, and that it was better than having to share a bed. She kept refusing, but he kept trying to persuade her, and that was how the night ended. The next morning, Alaya was already testing her new abilities, while Inori observed the huge number of powers he had acquired. There were so many that he could not even see them all, but he knew it would be good to level up each one. Alaya, on the other hand, had a special skill called Genius, and now, as a vampire, she could fly with ease. Unlike Inori, she didn't have the sun god's hatred debuff, so she wasn't weakened during the day. Setting that aside, Inori handed her a sword, asking her to draw it. As soon as she pulled out the blade, a beautiful aura appeared around the weapon. Alaya asked if he had created it. He replied that that sword was actually Diana's ancestral weapon, which Inori had modified with dark magic. Now it was called Absolute Black Blade. Seeing that, Alaya asked why he was giving her such a powerful weapon. Inori explained that, unfortunately, the magic of that world didn't work well with him. Even if he wielded the sword, it would barely cut anything, since the weapon's power depended on mana. The more mana the user had, the stronger the slash. Given that, Alaya wanted to confirm whether he was really sure about giving her such a powerful weapon, since it would make her much stronger. Inori said he didn't mind, as he could grow stronger in other ways, even without a sword like that. To sum it up, Alaya was different from Inori. She could use magic and magical artifacts from that world, but she couldn't level up or learn new skills like he could. Even so, Alaya proposed they have a competition to see who would become stronger, although she knew it would be a rather unfair contest, since Inori could evolve over time and she could not. Alaya said that wasn't a problem. She could just use her fangs, since she could also level up by drinking the blood of other creatures. That made sense. After all, if she could already fly, it was only natural that she had acquired other vampiric abilities. And unlike Inori, the first person whose blood she drank was Inori himself. Leaving that detail aside, Alaya asked why they were walking so slowly. That was when, all of a sudden, Fenrir appeared, saying it was his fault. If he had already recovered, they would be riding on his back by now. But poor Fenrir looked like a poodle. That was because, in a previous battle, Diana had literally sliced him in half. Even so, in Alaya's eyes, Fenrir looked more like a plush toy dog. She even tried to befriend him, but he vanished shortly after. Still, seeing Fenrir cheered Alaya up, and she decided to nickname him Fenny, for no particular reason. When Inori asked if she liked animals, she said no. In truth, she only took care of the pets her sister adopted. Since her sister was allergic allergic, it all ended up falling on Alaya. Setting that aside, Inori said it was time for them to leave. As they didn't have a clear destination yet, he wanted to gather information and travel to a nearby country, preferably a place where heroes were not summoned. However, Alaya replied that was impossible, as there was a rule. All 12 nations in that world were required to summon 3 heroes each. That explained why, in the case of Inori's classmates, the entire class had been summoned at once. In fact, he himself had been brought that way during the first summoning. With that, it became clear that the world had 36 active heroes, summoned by 12 different countries. In the end, maybe that was a good thing, since Inori might need help from some of them to face the Demon King, if that ever came to happen. Meanwhile, in a faraway place, several bodies were scattered across the ground. At the center of the scene, a girl claimed she had made all those sacrifices just to summon him again. Right after her declaration, bones began to form, and a man opened his eyes. That man was none other than Demon King Lord Yignua. Back with the main duo, Alaya was calmly walking down a street when several people began offering her food. In that city, she used the fake name Ari to avoid being recognized as Alaya, the missing princess. The place was called Ligan, a commercial city in the Holy Kingdom of Rin. It was a merchant city full of people, churches, and saints, as it was part of a sacred kingdom. To earn money, Alaya and Inori registered as adventurers in the local guild and began taking on jobs. However, due to the curse of the sun god, Inori could not work during the day. So, the daytime tasks were left to Aliyah, while Inori only showed up at night. But on that particular day, when Aliyah went to meet him, Inori was suddenly thrown far away, flying through the air completely unexpectedly. That was when a woman, apparently a paladin, suddenly appeared out of nowhere. She said she was surprised that Inori had survived her blow, since he looked like just a bum who spent his time flirting around. She then introduced herself as Fanatic Rasahos, a paladin from the Kingdom of Rin. But since the name was too complicated, Inori decided to just call her Rosa, which was easier to remember. Outside, Alaya watched the chaos and started realizing that her first city, her first job, and even the first person she met, unlike Inori, were already giving her a headache. On top of that, she was very far from home. Going back a bit in time, from Inori's perspective, the fake name he used was Kiri. He posed as a drunk who spent the entire day in the tavern, turning into a complete vagabond. To make things worse, he put all the drink bills under the name of Ari, which was how Alaya introduced herself in Legan. Unlike him, she was completing guild missions one after another and quickly rising in rank. Her efficiency was so remarkable that the locals gave her a nickname, Ari, the Black Rose. The name came from the combination of her absurd speed in defeating monsters, the black dress she wore, and her striking appearance. With the money Ari earned from the missions, Inori ended up becoming a total freeloader. People even started to suspect that he was blackmailing Ari, since it was strange for someone like her to be supporting a guy like him. During one of these conversations, a young man approached and asked if he thought it was right to play around with a woman's money every day. Inori, however, didn't care and said that guy was the only person he talked to. In truth, the two of them drank alone at the same tavern and became close because of their shared isolation. According to Inori, his real goal wasn't to drink all the time. He did it to build resistance to poisons and also to gather information. But he got so deep into the role that no one wanted to talk to him anymore. At least his poison skill was leveling up. While thinking about that, a cleric appeared and Inori quickly invited her to sit with him. But she refused, saying that alcohol was bad for your health. Inori noticed an embroidered symbol on her hood and tried to get a closer look, but it backfired. According to the girl, that symbol was proof of her faith in God and should not be treated lightly. After that statement, we return to the present moment. At that moment, Inori had just been launched into the air, thrown far away because of his wrong approach. Inside the tavern, the atmosphere was festive. The customers were happy because a paladin had finally shown up to deal with him. Some even asked her to take him away and put an end to the problem. Rosa replied that she accepted the mission. She intended to fix him in the name of God, as she never gave up on a single soul. Alaya, upon seeing the scene, stared at Rosa, who asked if there was a problem. Alaya then asked what exactly she intended to do with Inori. The answer was simple. Rosa said she would merely save him in the name of divine will. With that, Rosa took Inori and walked away with him. The people at the tavern, seeing that Ari had been left behind, asked if she was finally giving up on that crazy guy. But without answering, Alaya simply handed over all the food she had received and went after the protagonist. That was a disappointment for the tavern folk, since in the end, she was still sticking with the guy who, in everyone's eyes, was just a bum. On Inori's side, Rosa threw him onto a bench and began using magic, saying that he would soon feel better. She cast a healing spell that quickly sobered him up, shattering the drunk image he had been maintaining. Faced with that strange situation, Inori mentally questioned who this woman even was. She had introduced herself as a fanatic paladin, but even so, he decided to call her just Rosa because it was easier to remember. Without much explanation, Rosa suddenly grabbed Inori and said they were going to pray. Meanwhile, from a distance, Alaya observed the two and wondered if that kind of closeness was normal among commoners, because she thought they were standing a little too close. Before she could continue her thoughts, Fenrir interrupted her, stating that the woman was dangerous. According to him, Rosa seemed to carry a divine blessing, which could be extremely harmful to them, since both Alaya and Fenrir had demonic traits. The problem was that Alaya didn't know that until then. When Fenrir asked if she had come there because of that, she even agreed, a bit awkwardly. But deep down, everyone knew that wasn't exactly the reason. Inside the church, the space was vast, almost like a cathedral. They walked up to a gigantic statue, which, according to Rosa, represented their lord. Since they were in that sacred place, they needed to pray. She began to teach Inori that to represent the four goddesses and the main lord, one must join all five fingers and keep the eyes closed in prayer. Even without understanding anything, Inori decided to go along with it, since he had never prayed in his life. However, at the exact moment he began the prayer, he felt a strange presence, as if something or someone was observing his inner self. That sensation seemed like a deep connection, but it had nothing to do with Rosa, since she was also independently connected. The strangest part was that Inori's detection ability could not identify what it was. The simple fact of being watched left him extremely irritated. Even without knowing who was responsible, he mentally warned that they had better not try anything against him. Angry, Inori broke the spiritual connection and returned to reality, ending the prayer. Rosa, seeing that he had made an effort, praised his dedication, especially considering it was his first time. Internally, however, Inori couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. That feeling wouldn't leave his mind, and he decided he would return later to discover what was behind that strange connection. Meanwhile, on the other side of that mysterious link, in a completely different kingdom, the true lord of that world was watching everything alongside the four goddesses. They remarked on how Inori seemed like a truly interesting person. Sometime later, Inori returned to the bar, but this time he was all bruised. Before arriving, he had been completely beaten by Rosa. Since it was daytime, he was still suffering from the effects of light-based attacks, which were his weakness due to his demonic nature. So even though he tried to dodge here and there, he stood no chance. And the more he tried to defend himself, the more excited Rosa became to keep hitting him. From afar, Alaya and Fenrir watched the scene. Fenrir commented that he didn't understand why his master was allowing it, but he imagined it must be for a greater purpose. After all, if he wanted to, Inori could easily defeat Rosa. Back in the present, sitting inside the bar next to the old man who always drank with him, Inori recounted everything that had happened. The old man explained that Rosa was a paladin, practically a holy monster to demons, since they couldn't do anything against them. Besides combat techniques, paladins had sacred artifacts and control over divine mana, which made things even worse. And to complicate it all further, Inori could not use the artifacts from that world. At first, Inori even laughed at the situation, but when he heard that last part, he asked how the old man knew he couldn't use artifacts. However, before the man could answer, Rosa appeared out of nowhere, grabbed Inori, and dragged him out of the bar without saying a word. And so, Inori's training, which felt more like torture, continued. If things kept going like that, Inori would end up dying before even coming up with a plan for a peaceful life. So, he suggested something to his supposed master, which was to return to the church. In Rosa's mind, that meant Inori wanted to convert, which made her very happy. But in reality, he just wanted to escape the training and take the chance to investigate the church more closely. Standing before the statue again, Inori wanted to analyze that whole faith thing in the absolute goddess once more. It was strange that only he had felt that connection, which made him suspicious. Since his detection ability didn't pick up anything, that indicated the connection wasn't from that world, similar to some of the other abilities he had. Speaking of which, he used one of his abilities called Appraise, which allowed him to see complete details of anything around, like prices, people's identities, and hidden information. Upon observing carefully, he noticed that the statue of the absolute goddess was holding a strange stone. According to the appraisal results, that stone was born from the roots of the divine tree and acted as a channel for the goddess's power. The curious detail was that the stone was not connected to the blonde woman who had summoned him in the past, but instead to other different goddesses. That meant that when he broke the connection during the previous prayer, he didn't just reject one entity, but ended up provoking 5 goddesses at once. In the end, he had gotten himself into even bigger trouble. While he was deep in thought about that, Rosa suddenly got emotional, because someone had arrived. It was Raven, the fourth captain of the Paladins and the great hero of the Kingdom of Legend, known for saving an entire city from a horde of raging monsters 10 years ago. He was superior to Rosa, and she got so excited by his presence that she simply left Inori there and went to greet him. With the attention on Raven, Inori decided that since he was an important hero, it would be a good idea to take a look at his status using the appraise ability. But the moment he tried, Raven seemed to notice it, which showed that using that ability was more dangerous than it seemed. On Raven's side, he commented to his servant that he smelled someone of his own kind, which suggested that he might not be fully human either. Later, during another one of Inori's training sessions, Elias seemed a bit bothered. Since he came back from the church, he only thought about training and barely talked to her, which made her visibly upset. During the fight, Rosa praised Inori, saying he was dodging well against the attacks and magical artifacts. He thanked her, but deep down he knew he had learned the hard way how annoying it was to fight magical artifacts, especially after the battle against Diana. When Rosa asked if he had any weapon he was skilled with, he remembered the dark magic he used to wield. However, he knew he couldn't use it in that place, so he just said no. Upon hearing that, Rosa punched the ground and declared that the next day he would buy a weapon, since it made no sense for an adventurer to not have one. She also said that there would be no training the next day because she was going to meet with Raven. After saying that, Rosa simply left. Since it was already late afternoon, Inori approached Elia and asked if, during his fight with Rosa, she had found any opening to defeat him. She replied that she hadn't seen any, which didn't make sense since she just stood there watching the whole time. Hearing that, Inori asked what exactly she had been doing there. Right after, he asked if by any chance she would be free the next day because he needed help buying a weapon. Since Elia knew much more about the city than Inori and had contact with many people, he thought it would be better to walk around with her that day. But he also made it clear that if she were busy, he would go alone. To his surprise, however, Elia said she had no mission scheduled. She mentioned she knew a lot of people in the city and even teased him, saying he would not be able to manage without her. That got her all excited, jumping with enthusiasm, and Inori had no idea what was going on. She got so thrilled with the idea that she wanted to go buy the weapon that very day. However, he preferred to leave it for the next day. The next day, the two of them began walking around the city. They went everywhere except the weapon shop, which left Inori a little irritated. After all, he had a clear goal for that outing. Still, he let it slide. After a while, Elia finally took him to a shop recommended by other adventurers. According to Inori's appraisal, the weapons sold there were indeed high quality, but almost all of them contained magical items, which he could not use. The only exception was a demonic-looking scythe with no magical enchantment, but it drew too much attention, so he decided not to take it. While looking around, Inori mentioned that Elia should also pick a more discreet weapon, since her absolute black blade was too flashy. It was better to have an alternative, especially if she had to face other adventurers. Elia agreed and, looking around, found a small dagger. Using the appraise skill, Inori saw that the weapon was made of high-purity mithril and worked as a magical catalyst. It was almost like the absolute black blade, but obviously much weaker. Still, it was a great secondary weapon. The price, of course, was outrageous, nearly the cost of a kidney. But Inori assured her that it was not a problem since he spent money only on food. Besides, he hunted monsters at night, and combining that with what he had saved, he could easily afford the dagger. Elia tried to refuse, saying she did not need a gift, but Inori insisted. He said he wanted to give it to her, so she ended up accepting it. When they left the shop, Elia asked if he knew what it meant to give someone a dagger. Inori replied with another question, asking if it had some special meaning. With a mischievous smile, he simply said that nobody knew. Right next door, there was another weapon shop. This one, however, looked run down. At the entrance, there was even a spider hanging from a web, giving the impression the place was abandoned. Even so, the two decided to go in. The interior was not very impressive, but the old man who ran the shop looked quite respectable. He explained that his shop worked exclusively with custom orders and that he forged only one weapon at a time, made specifically to the customer's specifications. Inori asked if he made weapons without magical enchantments, and the old man said yes. Naturally, Inori activated his right eye, his special ability, and said he wanted to make a custom order. The blacksmith thanked him and explained that he needed to understand Inori's combat habits, body type, and all the details before starting the weapon. Inori agreed easily and even asked Elia to accompany him through the process. As for the spider at the entrance, it was actually a companion of the blacksmith. It was an elderly spider, known and respected by him. Fortunately, Elia did not try to scare it away or kill it and just avoided the web, since she had no idea the creature was a friend of the shop owner. Sometime later, Inori and Elia had to stop and eat something since the weapon ordering process had taken a long time. In the end, it was good that they made the decision quickly, because if they had hesitated, it would have taken the whole day. Feeling more relaxed, they left the busy part of town behind and sat at at a tea house. Inori mentioned that the taste of the tea reminded him of the castles, but Alia explained that it was not quite like that. In fact, she had wanted to visit that place for a long time. She walked by it every day and always wanted to go in, sit down, and have a cup, but she never had. That comment left Inori confused. If she wanted it so badly, why didn't she go? After all, she had money. Alia gave a vague answer, saying she just wanted to have a chat. Sometimes feelings like that came out of nowhere, a gentle sadness without reason. It was like she was too strong on the outside and a bit stupid on the inside, which left Inori even more lost. It felt like the stronger she got, the more her brain lost efficiency. Changing the subject, Alia asked why he had chosen that specific shop to order his weapon. Inori explained that he used his appraisal ability and noticed that all the weapons in that shop were of excellent quality. That was why he decided to go back and place an order with the old man who looked like a butler, but was actually the craftsman himself. While they were talking, Rosa suddenly appeared, asking if Inori had already bought his weapon. This surprised Inori, since she was supposed to be talking with Raven, but Rosa explained that she had already gone and come back. Quickly changing the subject, she wanted to know if Inori was once again getting close to another girl. Alia immediately tried to justify herself, saying they were just co-workers. At that moment, a man wearing a mask interrupted the conversation, telling Rosa to stop skipping steps and to use the stairs like a normal person. He explained that he was there to supervise Rosa, although he did not reveal his name, only his mask. Curious, Inori asked why he was watching Rosa, wanting to know if she had done something wrong. But according to Rosa, the issue was different. The relationship between her and Inori was confusing the church. Since holy knights were supposed to maintain purity according to religious precepts, someone needed to keep an eye on things. In short, the High Council believed Rosa and Inori were romantically involved. To make matters worse, the masked man said he knew both of them very well, calling Alia the Black Rose and Inori a bum. Inori's reputation was far from good. Even so, the masked man revealed something unexpected. He was part of the Black Rose fan club. More specifically, he was member number 5, and now he wanted advice from Inori on how to win a woman's heart. After all, despite all of Inori's messes, Alia was still with him. That request was a bit hypocritical, since he was there to monitor Rosa for suspected romantic involvement, while he himself wanted to be in a relationship. So the two groups split up. The men talked on one side and the women on the other. Rosa, being more extroverted, was the first to start a conversation. The problem was the topic she chose. She mentioned the mithril dagger she had received from Inori. According to an old tradition, when a woman receives a dagger from a man, especially in such a direct way, it is basically considered a marriage proposal. Symbolically, it meant that if he ever betrayed her, she would have a weapon to stab him. Of course, that interpretation only made sense if Inori actually knew what it meant. Since he didn't, the conversation between them stayed right there. Right after that, Rosa waved casually and left with the masked man, leaving Inori and Alia behind. Tired, Inori began internally complaining about how exhausting the day had been. Meanwhile, the masked man tried unsuccessfully to gather information about Inori just through conversation. He was not able to learn a single thing. Back on Inori's side, Alia mentioned that she still had to finish some missions, although it sounded sudden and out of place. Still, she left. Inori, still tired, returned alone. But as he approached his bedroom door, he sensed something was off. At that moment, a voice echoed inside his mind, praising his good intuition. The voice said that it made no sense to talk through the door and asked him to come in. As soon as Inori entered, he saw a woman standing by the window. She introduced herself simply as Fulis. Naturally, Inori wanted to know who she was, but all she gave was her name. Then she commented that he had managed to sense her presence even from outside. In short, Fulis already knew Inori, but he knew nothing about her. Since she was interested in understanding him better, she decided to come to him. And of course, if he was interested in learning spiritual magic, she could teach him herself. She also promised to explain more about herself. Right after saying that, Fulis simply pulled Inori onto the bed and threw herself on top of him. It was the kind of scene that would normally scare anyone, but Inori was surprisingly calm. He even thought that if something really were to happen, he wouldn't complain, since his partner there was a beautiful woman. Deep down, he wondered who would even refuse a banquet like that. Following that line of thought or not, Inori took advantage of how close Fulis was and tried to use his hypnosis magic. He thought it would work right away, but it didn't have the expected result. At the very least, he managed to get a kiss. However, that kiss had an unexpected effect. As soon as it happened, he was transported to another place. According to Fulis, that was her mental world, a personal dimension that each person possesses. Since they were inside her mind, in that space, Fulis was an absolute being. She had complete control and could do anything, from taking off his clothes to forcing him to sell his soul. At that moment, Fulis actually began putting that idea into action. She removed her own clothes, mounted on top of Inori, and asked why he was just lying there. She said she remembered one of his rather interesting abilities, related to desire and seduction. She wanted to know if he was afraid of forming deeper bonds bonds with others. Inori, however, just told her to shut up. When she looked deeper into his soul, she saw something dark, dense, and dangerous. Something that began to affect even her own mental world. She was accessing something she shouldn't have. For that reason, Inori repeated that she should shut up and stay away from him. Faced with that situation, Inori started to question whether that world was truly a place where Fulis had full control. Because in that moment, he himself was taking control. And as he well knew, domination was his specialty. Back in reality, things got even more complicated. Alaya appeared at the exact moment when Fulis was still on top of Inori. Upon seeing the scene, Alaya pulled out the mithril dagger she had received from him and commented that maybe it was time to stab him. But before she could do anything, Fulis simply collapsed to the ground, and from Inori's mouth, a small fairy came out. Once she regained consciousness, Fulis, now revealed in her true form, began to explain. She said she had approached Inori using a human appearance, intending to seduce and subjugate him. However, the plan backfired, and the opposite happened. Her true identity was Sylph, the supreme spirit of wind. According to Inori's appraisal, she had become a traitor to her former master. The reason for the betrayal was simple. Inori's domination ability had been strong enough to subjugate her, making him her new master. And speaking of her former master, Inori asked if it was one of those entities he had encountered at the church. Sylph confirmed it, which meant the gods were moving faster than he had imagined. Now that he had a subordinate who had once served directly under the higher entities, Inori wanted to know everything she knew. However, Sylph, despite everything, still had her pride as a supreme spirit. She said she wouldn't give up information so easily. Faced with that, Inori could have simply forced her using his domination ability, but he decided on another method, something a bit more heated. He activated his special ability related to seduction and began to use it intensely. Sounds and reactions began to fill the surroundings, while Sylph, who tried to resist, ended up completely defeated by the technique. In the end, the poor fairy was entirely overwhelmed, left in a state that wasn't even worth describing in detail. In the end, Inori decided he would verify the truth of her information and also better understand Sylph's abilities, something she agreed to immediately. However, deep inside she was already planning to deceive him. Once they reached the forest to test the spiritual magic, she realized she could no longer use it. That was happening because of Inori's domination magic, even if, at first glance, it didn't make much sense. Her hair had turned black, as had her magic, indicating that the domination was directly influencing her spiritual energy. Inori, upon realizing that his domination ability affected Sylph's powers, concluded that spirits were probably not considered living beings, since his domination skill did not work on living creatures. Thinking about that, he asked Sylph if she knew where they could find more spirits, to which she replied that there were many all around them. It was precisely because of those spirits that she had been able to find Inori so easily. In other words, anyone who could use spiritual magic could easily uncover the secrets of others. Because of that, Inori asked if there was a way to actually see the spirits, and Sylph found a way to show him. With her help, he started to see several colorful little creatures in the sky, which were actually minor spirits. Even though she could no longer use spiritual magic at that moment, Sylph was still a supreme spirit. So if someone used spiritual magic near her and she commanded the spirits around her, it would be impossible to track her presence using that same magic. That was extremely useful, especially because Inori feared being located through such means. Additionally, Sylph tried to use a bit of her powers and managed to summon a wind, but it was completely black. It looked like a shadow moving as if it were air. Upon seeing that, Inori had an idea and thought it could be very useful. Sometime later, he was already fighting monsters, but this time he was not using his usual dark magic. Instead, he was using exactly that shadow wind magic, the one he had learned from Sylph. She was surprised, not just because he could use that magic, but also because they had encountered a demonic monster there. Something unusual, since that kind of creature was supposed to exist only in the demon world. As the monster approached, it simply turned to dust. Inori, however, did not understand exactly why, so Sylph explained that it depended on the environment. Demonic monsters could only survive in places with a high concentration of demonic energy. In other words, the creature was like a fish out of water in an unsuitable environment. Speaking of the demon world, Aaliyah asked Sylph if she had ever been there, but she said no. Even so, the forest spirits were extremely agitated, and even the spirits of light were showing great fury. Inori, who could not see spirits, had no idea what was going on, but Aaliyah understood the situation more or less. That place was considered sacred ground, so it made no sense for a demonic beast to appear there, especially one that was alone and isolated. That clearly indicated that something strange was happening. Inori agreed with that assessment, even though he had not realized they were being watched from a distance by someone. Later on, the old butler named Sebastian finished forging Inori's new weapon. The sword had the ability to boost attribute power, more specifically attack power. The weapon's quality was so high that Inori felt compelled to praise it and even considered paying extra. However, Sebastian declined, stating that Inori would be his last customer in that region and that he hoped to meet him again somewhere else. As they left the shop, Inori remarked that he was not worried, since the money he used to pay for the sword was not even his. Rosa had given it to him, which Alaya clearly did not like. After all, he had accepted the gift and did not intend to do anything in return. Inori, however, said he had no obligation, since it was the master who had given it. Even so, according to Alaya, that was completely absurd. Inori knew he should go back and thank Rosa. Sometime later, he ended up finding her at the church, and naturally he had to show her the result of the money she had given, the new sword. Later, they sat on a bench, and she admired the weapon he carried. Although it might have looked like a strange scene, they were just talking about the combat sword. Inori explained that, even though it was obvious, he wanted to make it clear that the sword was not magical. He told her that his body could not handle enchanted weapons, which made learning anything related to magic much more difficult. Upon hearing that, Rosa asked if perhaps he truly wanted to end their connection. Inori was direct in saying that, to begin with, he had never felt anything for her, and even if it continued, it would not make any sense. In the end, he suspected that Rosa was just wasting her time. Even so, Rosa admitted that training Inori was difficult, but she said that she would still choose to stay by his side for the rest of her life, until she saw him become strong. Her specialty was believing in others. Although the declaration sounded a bit over the top, especially the part about staying with him forever, Inori ended up accepting it. After all, even if the training did not go very well, at least he was doing something other than just drinking. However, that hope did not last long. In the very next scene, he was already drinking and talking about women with none other than the masked man, who was not even supposed to be there. Since that day, Inori had been talking to the masked man rather often. He had already figured out that the man probably had some hidden agenda, but since that was not his problem, he chose to ignore it. The conversation drifted through random topics until they began talking about the women from that bar. Without realizing it, they ended up specifically commenting on Alia. And as expected, not long after, she showed up and punched both of them, making it clear that if they kept up that behavior, they would be banned from the place. The curious part was that even while scolding and hitting them, she still apologized to the other patrons for the commotion. Meanwhile, Inori asked why the masked man was even there. After all, in theory, he was supposed to be watching Rosa. According to him, his mission was to observe Rosa, but that also included keeping an eye on Inori, since the two were close. Besides, he could not be with her at that moment because Rosa was undergoing a very important trial, something like a promotion within the priesthood. That test was extremely dangerous, with a real risk of death, so she needed complete focus. Upon hearing that, Inori was surprised. He did not expect Rosa to be working that hard. The masked man confirmed and started explaining several reasons why the test was happening. Meanwhile, Alaya grew more and more furious, as the two men clearly showed no remorse for what they were doing. To help our protagonist escape that awkward situation, guess who suddenly appeared in the bar? None other than that strange old man with the weird hood. Nobody really knew why he dressed like that, but Inori did not seem to care. When he asked the old man for help getting out of that mess, he got a direct answer. He would not get involved, since it was Inori himself who got into it. The strange part was that as soon as the masked man saw the old man, he said he needed to leave immediately. After his exit, the old man turned to Inori and commented that it would be wise to be more careful with his new friendships. Upon hearing that, Inori found it ironic, since that old man was probably the most hated person in that entire place. Even so, he brushed off the conversation and was already thinking about ordering more beer. However, Sylph, who was fused with Inori's body, asked why he was so calm around that man. From the moment the old man entered, she had felt an instinctive revulsion, as if something inside her was screaming to run away. To make things worse, the old man had already sensed her presence. He even remarked that Inori seemed to be carrying a high-class spirit and said there was no need to be on edge, since he could see things that others could not. That was when Inori, for the first time, decided to use his Eye of Prophecy, and when he cast the analysis spell, he discovered who the old man really was. His name was Ignoa, and all of his stats revealed that he was none other than the Demon King himself. Only after that revelation did everything click for Inori. It was impressive how he had completely ignored that suspicious man's presence up to that point, even though he was someone clearly rejected by everyone around. Only then did he realize how reckless he had been for not investigating the old man from the beginning. Meanwhile, Alaya was watching everything, not understanding what was going on. Suddenly, the old man suggested that they continue the conversation somewhere else, as the bar was too small for it. To top off the shock, he called Inori by his full name, which immediately startled Alaya. Even so, Inori agreed to go with him, and with a firm tone, ordered Alia to stay where she was. Sometime later, already in a remote area of the forest, the old man once again said that Inori did not need to be on the defensive, but the situation was clearly suspicious. After all, they were in the middle of nowhere, with no witnesses, and anything could happen. Out of nowhere, the old man released such a powerful aura that it expelled all the spirits in the area. Even Sylph was forced to disconnect for a moment, something the old man himself had forgotten. Since no one else was there, he removed his hood and asked if, by his appearance, Inori could guess what he was. It was hard to tell, so Inori commented that he looked like a fruit salad made from various mixed races. Ignoa confirmed it, laughing at the comparison, since he even had a tail, and explained that he was a hybrid homunculus, formed from portions of various races from that world. In simple words, his body was a combination of everything that existed there. He also revealed that, in his past life, he had been a demon, as this was his second reincarnation. And to make things even clearer, he had once held the title of Demon King. Because of the hierarchy among demons, Ignoa rose more and more in power and influence. Over time, he came to have everything he wanted: drinks, women, fortune, and absolute authority. In short, he lived surrounded by luxury, and no one was capable of stopping him. He defeated entire races, accumulated countless riches, but in the end, he realized that all of it only served to fill a void with temporary happiness. After coming to that conclusion, he simply died. He died of old age, as there was no opponent strong enough to defeat him. It was at that moment that Igno met a goddess in a strange, unknown, and completely empty dimension. Inori thought it might be that blonde woman he knew, but Ignoa made it clear that it was not. That figure was a supreme deity of that world. The reason she called him there was simple: he had gone too far. So she took everything from him: his memories, his magical power, his combat ability, and all the talent he had. Even so, strangely, he still seemed to remember all of it, which made no sense, but that was what happened. After that, Ignoa was reincarnated in the abandoned world, which is exactly the world where Inori came from. According to him, that was a world forgotten by the gods. There, Ignoa lived a completely normal life. He had a family, got a job, struggled with his boss, got married, had children, and in the end, died of old age once again. However, unlike his previous life, in that one, he had been truly happy. As a demon king, he could have anything he wanted, but he never found peace or lasting joy. But as a normal person, even having lost everything he had achieved in the past life, he finally found true happiness. It was ironic, but real. That is why, in this new life, his desire became to help others find happiness too, something that Inori understood well. Even so, according to Ignoa, trying to make others happy was a utopia. He wanted to help everyone with that strange body he had, even though it was made of parts from all the races. And no, that did not involve going around beating up enemies like humans usually did. In fact, he had lost the main traits of each race, which were 6 for those who wanted the exact number, something even Inori did not know until that moment. Besides that, as he had already noticed at the tavern, all the people were afraid of Ignoa, and that was because of the goddesses, who had implanted a seed of discord among the people. Since Inori came from another world, he did not fully understand all of that. But according to Ignoa, all it would take was for him to travel a bit through that continent to see with his own eyes the existence of a constant war, full of discrimination, injustice, and abuse. Inori, not having much patience for long speeches, ended up asking why Ignoa was telling him all that. The answer was direct. Ignoa wanted to solve the problems of that world and needed Inori's help to do it, which at first glance made no sense at all. After all, in theory, the right thing would be to fight against the Demon King, not help him. However, Ignoa explained that he initially intended to do everything alone, but after seeing Inori, he felt the desire to count on an ally. He made it clear that he would not force anything, but suggested that Inori think it over, because if he agreed to help, he would receive an advance bonus. According to Ignoa, the destruction of that world would come precisely at the hands of Inori. Ignoa's proposal was simple. If Inori walked alongside the Demon King, anything he did wrong would automatically fall on Ignoa. In other words, Inori could go around killing whoever he wanted, challenging anyone, and doing whatever he pleased. And if something went wrong or someone had to be blamed, the one at fault would be the Demon King, since he already had a reputation for being evil. Faced with such an interesting offer, Inori ended up accepting. On top of that, he asked for more bonuses, which left Ignoa completely confused. Going back a bit in time, Elia was still trying to understand the situation. She had been left behind after Inori ordered her to stay back while he talked to a totally unknown man who somehow knew everything about him. Not understanding anything, Elia watched from a distance, worried. What disturbed her the most was that she had never seen that expression on Inori's face before. He was genuinely worried, and that left her feeling uneasy. She was so deep in her thoughts that she did not even notice some monsters had silently approached her. Luckily, Rosa appeared just in time and easily defeated the monsters. After that, Elia thanked her for the help, help. Rosa commented that she should be more careful because it was a dangerous area, and clearly, she was distracted thinking about something serious, since she had not even noticed the monsters behind her. Knowing Alaya's personality well, Rosa quickly deduced that it had to do with Inori. Just by looking at the girl's expression, she said the two of them were exactly the same. Then, without warning, Rosa tried to punch Alaya, which seemed senseless. But according to her, she just wanted to test the girl's strength, since she was standing in front of the famous Black Rose, and maybe a fight would help clear her thoughts. Alaya did not quite understand, but she also had no time to question it. During the exchange of blows, Rosa asked if Alaya believed in the gods. Before she could even respond, Rosa confessed that for a long time she did not believe in anything. Her mother every day said prayers to the gods and insisted that she do the same, but Rosa never understood why. One day, their village was attacked by demons. Her mother tried to protect her and flee, but ended up dying to save her. Surrounded by monsters on all sides, Rosa gave up trying to escape and said a prayer with all her heart. To her surprise, a goddess answered. At that moment, she was saved. From that day on, she started believing in the goddesses. Before that, she had no faith at all. But after that event, she stopped being just a helpless child who only knew how to pray. She became a strong person who prayed and also protected others. With this story, she wanted to show Alaya that it was possible to be strong and still have faith, and that maybe it was time for her to go and save Inori. Frustrated, Alaya replied that Inori had not even given her a chance. She got so emotional that, without thinking, she punched Rosa in the face, making the other girl's nose bleed. Rosa, however, did not react badly. In fact, she was surprised by the strength of the blow. And even if she did not want to admit it, the punch was strong enough to knock her out for a moment. Sometime later, already lying on Alaya's lap, Rosa began to explain that, in truth, she felt jealous of her. That was because Aliyah knew Inori much better than she did. Only then did Alaya finally understand. Rosa's way of comforting someone was not through gentle words, but through straightforward punches. Even so, Alaya genuinely felt grateful in the end. That punch Alaya had given was actually a technique called Black Rose Thorn. It had nothing to do with her getting emotional. When night fell, Inori finally appeared, arriving late as always. He commented that he had not finished the mission as quickly as he expected, but at least he had gathered plenty of information. Despite that, Alaya ended up exhausted, not only physically, but also because, in the end, nothing serious had happened. Even so, she was still a bit worried about him. Deep down, she thought it might be better if he simply disappeared. If he happened to die and his head were delivered on a tray, she could finally feel free from that whole situation. When Inori looked at her face, he realized that was truly what she thought. And since she was in the mood to make ironic remarks, he decided to invite her to take part in a small test, just to evaluate her skills. Alaya found it suspicious, after all. Who decides to test someone's abilities late at night, especially coming from someone who only shows up at that hour? Meanwhile, in another scene, several women were undressed inside what seemed to be a church. The masked man was there, receiving orders from a mysterious figure apparently involved in occult acts that could not be revealed. This man questioned him about the missing daughter, who was supposed to begin her work, in quotation marks, soon, just as planned. No one knew exactly what that work was, but judging by the appearance of the supposed saint in that place, it was clear she was not a saint at all. The true role of the masked man was to recruit new Templar knights for the church, thus increasing the number of followers. He accepted the task, but as soon as he reached his room, he removed the mask. Even though his face was not shown, the narration made it clear he was a good person. After that, he called out to a woman named Chris, saying to himself that he would do anything to find her. This made it clear that he was searching for someone, and that all those actions were part of his plan to reach her. Far from there, outside the castle, a white-haired girl, or at least she looked like one, was fighting several demonic monsters. She had a very specific objective in mind. The first phase of that plan was to devour the entire forest with the help of her creatures. At dawn the next day, Inori, who was still sleeping, continued resting. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the city, the hardworking Alaya was already up, finding food and handling various tasks at the guild. Sylph began to wonder why two such different people were together, but she did not take long to drop that thought. Soon after, someone offered her a slice of orange cake. She hesitated, which confused Alaya, since she had never seen anyone refuse cake. According to Sylph, she should not be compared to a mere human. Realizing she might have been offensive, Alaya apologized. She only wanted to be kind and see if Sylph liked it. Noticing that she had been too strict, Sylph decided to try the cake, because, after all, she could not say she disliked something without trying it first. The moment she took the first bite, she became completely addicted, and to complete it, she also drank a cup of tea. After that, Sylph was feeling much more cheerful and a little rounder as well. In the end, they agreed it would be best to keep that moment a secret. Inori had no idea that the two of them were eating sweets behind his back. Faced with this situation, Sylph commented that he and Alaya were nothing alike. According to her, Alaya was gentle, delicate, and kind, while Inori was exactly the opposite. Because of that, she could not understand why Alaya still stayed by his side. Alaya, however, simply answered that one day she would definitely defeat him, which made no sense at all to Sylph. Realizing the confusion, Alaya decided to explain the whole situation between her and Inori. Sylph did not fully understand, but accepted it as best she could, since in her view, the relationship between the two was quite strange, even if it seemed somewhat like that of a master and servant. While they were talking, Fenrir suddenly appeared, asking where Inori was. Leah explained that he was still sleeping, and took the opportunity to introduce them. She said that this was Sylph, and that one was Fenrir. They both introduced themselves, and apparently Sylph was hierarchically superior to Fenrir, something he also acknowledged. Setting that aside, the reason for Fenrir's sudden appearance was serious. The forest he had been protecting simply no longer existed. Concerned by this information, Alaya decided to go there and check it out herself. Upon arriving, she confirmed that everything had been completely devastated. There was no vegetation, no life, and no trace of the forest that once existed. According to Sylph, even the lesser spirits, the most basic and common in that environment, had disappeared. Faced with such an alarming situation, the three of them decided to investigate the cause of the destruction. They all recognized that something was seriously wrong, and that they needed to discover the source of the problem as soon as possible. If you enjoyed this part of the story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapters. Head to the next video. It's just as good as this one. See you next time.